Chapter 175, Deduction. Lenivis? That criminal who cheated both money and sex? To think that he had a connection to Hood Eugen from the psychology alchemists. Klein froze for a moment when he heard the name. He immediately thought about the implications the name Lenivis had. He's the cheat that escaped with more than 10,000 pounds. Just providing a clue would earn me 10 pounds. And if I help in capturing this moving treasury, I'll earn 100 pounds. He's a scum that took advantage of the bodies and feelings of innocent women. To think that he knows Hood Eugen and went to visit him 3 times at the mental asylum. Does this mean that he's connected to the Beyonder circle, or that he's a Beyonder himself? Klein suddenly recalled the name of a potion, the Marauder Pathway Sequence 8, Swindler. These Beyonders took pleasure in swindling others. It's very possible. Klein nodded in thought. He controlled his facial expression and body language, feigning nonchalance as he asked, then, when was Mr. Lenivis's last visit to Hood Eugen? Early July. I would have to check the registration records of the mental asylum to give you a specific date, Daxter Guderian replied after a few seconds of thought. Lenivis's scam hadn't been exposed back in early July and he hadn't left Tingen. Klein then asked, does Hood Eugen mention this person usually? No. You should understand that a Sequence 7 psychiatrist would never reveal something by accident. Every word they say has been deliberated over thoroughly. It would be impossible to learn their secrets unless they have some other hidden motives. I was only able to get the telepathist formula after Hood Eugen went mad. Oh right, have you determined the authenticity of the formula? Daxter expertly hid his feelings of pride toward his Pathways potion. Klein laughed and replied, it's authentic. When you need to advance, you can use that to concoct your potion without worry. We can help if the psychology alchemists are unable to provide you with the ingredients. Also, how have you been lately? Not too bad. Other than being a little worried about Hood Eugen's condition, I feel rather relaxed. I no longer have symptoms of a split personality. You've helped me greatly in this regard, Daxter Guderian said, full of emotion. Klein wore a humble expression. It's only right. Let's return to the topic at hand. Since you said that a psychiatrist would deliberate over their every word before uttering it and wouldn't easily reveal their secrets, why did Hood Eugen tell you that L is Lenivis? Was he hinting at something, or was trying to warn you of anything? Daxter froze for a moment, then creased his brows. This is really weird, to think that I didn't notice this. Other than that, Hood Eugen didn't mention anything else. Could his motive be for me to tell the upper echelons of the association about the name Lenivis should he meet with any problems? The association's reaction seemed strange, too. After I informed them about Hood Eugen's insanity, they did send a liaison. But after I described every detail, including Lenivis's name, there were no more replies from the upper echelons. It was like being a stone cast in the ocean. Could this mean that they've figured something out? A reasonable deduction. Klein took out his demon hunting bullets and stuffed them into his revolver, then took aim at the target. If we follow this deduction, Hood Eugen might have long anticipated that he would become insane or die. And this has an untenable connection with Lenivis? But since he already anticipated it, why didn't he ask for help from the upper echelons? Daxter gazed blankly ahead. He thought hard as he said, unfortunately, he's insane now. There's no way to effectively communicate with him now. Perhaps some kind of temptation made him choose to take the risk. Klein made a guess. At the same time, he felt that it was regrettable that Hood Eugen had really become a mental patient. This compromised much of the information that he might have otherwise gotten. Sigh. Even a dead person is better than a lunatic. I can use mediumship rituals to make the dead talk, but what can I do with a lunatic? Oh right, Madame Daly once tried to use mediumship rituals to call upon my lost memories. The theory behind the mediumship rituals seems to have been derived from the psychology alchemists. This means that I can also use the mediumship rituals on the living and create a scenario where I interact with his spirit directly using my spirit. I wonder if Hood Eugen would still be insane under those conditions. Unfortunately, I'm not advanced enough in this field, so I don't think I would be able to do it. I'll call upon the messenger and ask Madame Daly about it first. I'll see if she can provide me with any techniques. If she thinks that only she can accomplish it, then I'll tell the captain and get him to send a telegraph to Backlund to request for assistance. I'm definitely not taking this troublesome course of action just because I want to learn the technique and attempt the ritual to summon the messenger. Many thoughts ran through Klein's mind before he gradually narrowed it down to a single line of thought that could solve the problem. Daxter Guderian approved of his guess. Greed always makes one foolish. Even when a person knows that there's only the abyss in front of him, he'll still attempt to walk to the edge and take a peek. This is called crazily testing the limits of fate. Klein lampooned. Try your best to treat Hood Eugen after returning to the mental asylum. Try to keep him sober for a period of time and get some clues out of him. Also, don't hide your worries and anxiety. Establish more connections with the psychology alchemists and put pressure on them to solve Hood Eugen's problem. That's the most normal and reasonable reaction. Daxter nodded seriously. I'll try my best. Klein didn't say any more and, after some deliberation, he asked, has there been any abnormalities with Hood Eugen's body recently? For example, thin scales growing on some parts of his body? Near insanity, true insanity, and losing control were all descriptions of varying levels for a Beyonder when something was wrong with them. The least severe of the conditions were when their attitude changed as if they had become a new person, but were still capable of rational thoughts and actions. That was near insanity. Insanity was more severe in that the person would lose all logic, becoming a maniac and was difficult to communicate with. Those that couldn't be saved were those whose body and mind had become monsters, completely losing control. Sometimes, if the problem wasn't dealt with promptly, insanity would lead to losing control. Before this, to avoid exposing the informant within the psychology alchemists, Dunn instructed the Nighthawks not to immediately deal with Hood Eugen. Instead, they switched to surveillance to ensure that Hood Eugen didn't lose control. But if there were signs of him losing control, they would have to deal with him immediately. Daxter shook his head and let out a bitter laugh. No, you can ease your concern. I'm also very afraid that Hood Eugen will lose control, so I'm paying very close attention to detail. After all, I'm at the mental asylum 6 times a week. After exchanging a few more words, they left the shooting range 10 minutes apart. Klein fought back his intense desire to sleep and took a public carriage back to Daffodil Street. He opened the door and saw his sister sitting on the sofa. She was neither reading nor was she fiddling with machinery parts. She was just staring blankly ahead as if she had lost her soul. Tapping his molars gently, Klein activated his spirit vision and asked, puzzled, Melissa, did something happen? She looks healthy based on the colors of her aura, not malnourished like she was before. Melissa retracted her gaze and pursed her lips, then looked at the kitchen which was producing some noise. Bella has been recommending the way that her family prepares breakfast back at home. She said that it's very delicious. I agreed to let her try it out this morning. What method is that? Klein had an ominous feeling. Cooking all of the leftovers in a pot, then adding water and bread, Melissa repeated softly. This is the standard recipe for food of unknown origins. Klein pinched his forehead. And so? We shouldn't waste food. Melissa bit her lips and nodded. Sis, I feel like you are questioning life. Klein cleared his throat and suppressed his desire to laugh. He then asked, where's Benson? In the bathroom. Melissa broke free of her daze, as her eyes regained their luster. At that moment, he heard the sounds of flushing from the bathroom. Benson came out with a newspaper in hand. My dear Klein, shall we get you a portion of breakfast? No, I've already eaten. Klein shook his head resolutely, feeling lucky that he arranged to meet Daxter in the morning. Otherwise, he wouldn't have gotten Roseanne to buy breakfast for him. How regrettable. Otherwise, you would change your views on my culinary skills and be filled with confidence about it. Benson let out a self-deprecating laugh. At this moment, Melissa noticed something. She turned to look at Klein and said, you're back rather late today. Sis, be more innocent and lively. Don't worry about me all the time. The state you were in just now was great. Klein immediately smiled. I have good news. You passed the examination of the police department and can obtain an increased salary? Melissa asked without thinking. Benson also smiled and nodded. Klein grabbed his hat and stood at the edge of the living room. He said in amusement, how I'm supposed to surprise you guys like that? After that, he added with a dry cough, yes, my salary has increased several-fold. He hid his recent increment of 4 additional pounds a week. He intended to save up a small piggy bank for himself. After all, he couldn't just rely on the money in the unmarked account. Furthermore, mentioning that his salary had increased several-fold was enough to scare his siblings. 6 pounds? Melissa exclaimed in shock, finding it bizarre. I really need to change my job. Benson stroked his hairline. With the information Klein provided him, he had been putting a lot of effort into his studies. Without waiting for Klein to speak, Melissa said with a delighted expression, in that case, after deducting our normal expenses, you'll be able to save up enough money in 2 or 3 years to meet the standards of a marriageable gentleman. Well, it was Elizabeth who told me about the standards. Klein said at a loss, amused, that's something to be considered far into the future. Shouldn't we celebrate? I hereby announce that from today on, our staple food shall become white bread. After my workload decreases, we shall go try out delicacies from different restaurants. Melissa glanced at him, and, as though she did not hear what Klein had said, she said, Benson and I are attending Mass at the St. Selena Cathedral, do you want to come? I am praising the goddess every day. Klein laughed. I need to catch up on sleep. He slept until 12:30 in the afternoon. After he had lunch with Benson and Melissa, he continued on with his mission of searching all the houses with red chimneys. When it was late at night, he sealed his room with spirituality and prepared to try the ritual for summoning spirit guide Daly's messenger. Chapter 176, Letter for Klein. Setting up a simple ritual was as easy as breathing. Very soon, he was done preparing the ingredients, and he lit up the candle that represented himself. Looking at the flickering candlelight on the desk, Klein had an amusing thought for some baffling reason. Would this be considered holding a candlelight vigil in memory of myself? Fuck, what the hell am I thinking? He reined back his thoughts and picked up the black rotten flour powder that belonged to the domain of death and sprinkled it onto the candle. In return, he caught a whiff of a smell that was akin to formaldehyde from his previous life. Immediately after that, he dripped full moon essence oil, a favorite item of the Evernight. Amidst a sizzling crackle, his surroundings suddenly became quiet, and there was a shapeless, magical surge. Klein took a step back and softly recited in ancient Hermes, I. Then, he changed into Hermes, I summon in my name. The spirit that wanders about the unfounded, the higher dimensional creature that a human orders, the messenger that belongs to Daily Simone. Whoosh! The wind wailed and the dim candlelight was tainted with a blue luster. Under its illumination, the wall behind the desk produced translucent ripples, and a creepy face surfaced. Other than its mouth, it had no eyebrows, eyes, or nose. Its thick lips parted, and a long red tongue was extended. There were sharp, irregular teeth that lined its mouth. In addition, the tip of the tongue had 5 delicate fingers. They were constantly extending and retracting, as though they were waiting for a delivery. This is Daly's messenger? Compared to Mr. Azik's, it's just like a child. No, I can't accurately determine their differences. Yes, one is an adult giant, and the other is a human baby. I wonder if it's due to the magical item, or if it signifies Mr. Azik's strength. I have to reevaluate my understanding of him. Perhaps, he's a high-sequence beyonder. Crap, I forgot. In the letter, I should have asked Madame Daly for the names of the Sequence 4 and Sequence 3 Corpse Collector pathway. Mr. Azik most likely belongs to that pathway. Of course, he might have not advanced via potions. Yes, perhaps it's a gene that's passed down from his ancestors. I'll ask next time, the messenger is waiting. Klein looked at it seriously for a while and passed the neatly folded paper into the messenger's hand. Then, he watched as the hand gripped it tightly. Whoosh! The messenger retracted its tongue and swallowed the letter. The translucent, creepy, and wriggling face shrank back into the wall and disappeared. I've got to say, this magic is quite cool. Rather convenient too, but it can't be spread. Klein looked at the candlelight that had returned to normal. He shook his head and ended the ritual. Monday morning. Backlund, Empress Borough. In a hidden corner of the municipal garden built by Duke Negan, Xiao Dericha with her unkempt blonde hair and Furs Wall with her languid bearing were gawking at the liaison before them in a daze. They were momentarily at a loss at which language to use for a greeting. The petite Xiao, who was slightly over 1.5 meters tall, looked at the golden retriever that had extended its tongue and was wagging its tail. She smoothed out her trainee night attire and weighed her words before she said, "Are you Miss Audrey's messenger?" "Oh my goddess, why am I asking a dog so seriously?" Furs was holding a thin cigarette with her fingers as she chuckled. "Maybe it's a magical creature?" "I've never seen a magical creature that looks so much like a dog," Xiao replied in all seriousness. Susie sat down and closed her mouth. She then pointed at her belly with her paw. There was a leather pouch tied around the dog's body amidst her long golden fur. Xiao looked to her left and right, making sure that there was no one watching before she quickly moved closer. She bent down and removed the pouch. Furs watched curiously when her expression suddenly turned weird. "It's made of crocodile skin, and it looks like the work of the fashion designer, Mr. Sadas. She's actually using such a pouch for the transaction. In other words, it's very expensive?" Xiao raised the leather pouch. Furs pursed her lips tightly and nodded seriously. Xiao instantly lowered her speed in an exaggerated manner. She carefully opened the zipper and took out the letter inside, as though she was carrying an antique vase in her hands. After she read it, she passed the letter to Furs. Furs burned it with her cigarette after reading it carefully. She watched as it turned into ashes and scattered onto the soil. "There's no extra information provided." Xiao pouted subconsciously. She took out a neatly folded paper from the pocket of her trainee night attire. She looked at Susie in an imposing manner and exhorted subconsciously, "This is the investigation report for the past few days. You must pass this on to Miss Audrey Hall directly." Susie quivered and sat up straight, her tail was wagging vigorously. Xiao nodded in satisfaction, stuffed the stack of papers into the leather pouch, and tied it around Susie again. Susie howled and ran off very quickly. In the Hall family's luxurious villa, Audrey was sitting on the sofa of her own living room. She was holding a letter opener and was trying to open the letter before her. It was a letter sent by one of her brothers from the Balam Empire in the southern continent. There was a parcel that came along with the letter. At that moment, she saw Susie push open the half-closed door. The dog dashed over quickly. Susie sat on the carpet before Audrey and pawed at the leather pouch. "You really are an excellent messenger." Audrey wasn't stingy with her compliments. Susie looked back at the door. It induced vibrations in the air and said softly, "Your friend is very serious. When I saw her, she reminded me of the time when a hunter came to train us. She had been a complimentary gift and Count Hall bought hunting dogs." "Susie, your loan is getting more and more fluent. There are just a few problems with your logic in using the language." Audrey watched as her golden retriever took off the pouch on her own and skillfully pulled open the zipper. She gave Susie a look and immediately understood. She stood up and ran to lock the door. "There's no results so far, but we found that some vagrants disappeared around the Backlund Bridge borough. Though, we can't know for sure that it was Kalangos. Perhaps the vagrants merely changed their movement patterns suddenly." Audrey flipped through the investigation report and seriously wondered how she should reply to Xiao and Furs. "I'll tell Xiao that as long as she can track down Rear Admiral Hurricane, Kalangos, I'll buy the sheriff potion formula for her." No, that's not friendly enough. It would make her feel an inferiority complex. "Yes, I shall say, Zio, I've prepared your reward. As long as you can complete the task, 450 pounds will be yours. Sigh, as far as the main ingredients for the telepathist formula, I've only found the Farsman rabbit's spinal fluid. I still need the rainbow salamander's pituitary gland. Glaint, Zio, and Furs have yet to find it. Audrey, cheer up. At least you've digested the spectator potion completely. Once you put together all the ingredients, you'll become a Sequence 8 Beyonder. Audrey reined in her thoughts, picked up a pen and paper, and quickly wrote a reply. She stuffed it back into the leather pouch and entrusted Susie to make another trip. She watched her golden retriever as she opened the letter that her brother had sent. She read it with a smile. My dear sister, I think you should come to the southern continent too. Come over to the colonized regions of the Balam Empire. There's abundant sunlight, fresh air, a clean environment, freshly caught seafood, various unique cultures, and the very kind and obedient Balam people who make good servants, as well as the smell of freedom. On the contrary, Backlund is cold and moist, the air is bad, there's always dust, and it's always gloomy. Plus, it's highly populated, which leads to all sorts of problems. And the endless balls, banquets, and salons. The social events are so boring and insipid that I wouldn't want to stay for a minute. Dear sister, I believe you share the same feeling. I'm not running away from home. I'm merely seeking my own place in life, but our brother definitely doesn't think so. He's always been a selfish person. Of course, he wouldn't be stingy with you, because you can only claim a tiny part of the family wealth, while I would be his biggest competition in the fight for the inheritance within the ranks of nobles. After all, our father is a duke who takes a long view. He definitely wouldn't be restrained by the rule that the eldest sibling will inherit the rank of nobility. As long as he feels that it's necessary, he would do anything. Just like when he sold off half the farmland and pastures to enter the banking industry, regardless of the strong opposition. I miss Backlund sometimes, mostly father, mother, and you. I miss the smile that you put on my face during those few years. You must have become the most dazzling gem in Backlund, but unfortunately, I'll only be able to return after 2 years. A career is a man's pride, while the outstanding young people in the Lone Kingdom treat the world as their stage. You can tell our dear aunt that the coastal regions in the Balam Empire are very suitable for vacations, and especially suitable for her, given how her joints ache and swell in the winter. I sincerely invite her to be my guest. If you can come with her, that would be even better. I didn't send you too many gifts. They're mainly things that are rich with the traditions and styles of Balam, such as the unique yellow silk, and the ornaments that are filled with traits related to the worship of death. I remembered that you love things regarding mysticism, so I'll look around for you. The culture here is full of mystery. After reading the letter, Audrey picked up a pen, paper, and writing board. She leaned back into the sofa, pursed her lips and wrote seriously, My dearest Alfred, although it has been less than a year, the little girl in your memories has grown up. I don't like mysticism anymore, so you don't have to search for those kinds of things. Because it's very dangerous. Audrey puffed up her cheeks and added in her head. She had heard of too many tragedies related to mysterious objects when participating in Beyonder gatherings and from stories Zio and Furs recounted. She thought and declared excitedly, I'm now interested in biology. Recently, I've been in awe of the rainbow salamander. Can you ask around for me and find out where I can find one of these creatures, or if they have a complete corpse that has been preserved? Chapter 177. Sudden turn of events. Audrey stopped writing after she finished sharing some interesting news and scandals about aristocrats. She then adopted a serious pose as she recalled something. With her exceptional memory as a spectator, she arranged the information that she had received from her father's teachings, as well as the news she heard during banquets and salons, into paragraphs. After creating a draft in her head, Audrey penned, As for the political situation in Backlund you asked about, it's not within my area of interest. I can describe it to you only based on my own impressions and the details that I happen to know. Some time ago, Father told me that after the abolishment of the Grain Act, the prices of crops were declining rapidly. The rent of farmland and pastures were also plunging, but I don't know the exact magnitude. I can only explain it to you with this example. As you know, Duke Negan is an aristocrat who owns the most land outside of the royal family. It's said that he owns more than £12 million worth of farmland, pastures, and forests. Last year, his land earned him a historic £1,300,000 in rent. But this year, it's forecast that his rent will only be £850,000, a whole £450,000 less. That's more than the entirety of the assets that I'm entitled to. Without any further explanation from me, I'm sure that my dear brother will understand the behavior of most old-fashioned nobles. They're proud of being landowners, and their income is derived mostly from rent. They place a heavy emphasis on their appearance and would maintain their current lifestyle even if they have to go into debt. They spend tens of thousands of pounds on the upkeep of their castles each year, many more thousands on clothes and jewelry, as well as their persistent hunting activities, social banquets, and the occasional lavish weddings and funerals, etc., etc. With the decrease in rent, according to my knowledge, a good portion of the nobles have met with financial difficulties. Because of this, Count Wolf has sold 84,000 ares of land in the countryside and gotten £29,000 in return. Viscount Conrad has also sold his art collection worth £55,000 to a national art gallery. Other than a few visionary nobles who had long shifted their focus to steel, coal, railroads, banks, and rubber industries, the rest of the nobles have been severely affected by the Grain Act. Let us praise our dear Count Hall. Father told me that the financial distress will loosen the control the nobles have over politics. As you can imagine, the number of ministers with blue blood will decline from the next year onward. In a bid to secure funding, the Conservative Party and the New Party have promised to confer upon anyone the noble titles as long as they donate a sufficient amount of money and lack any criminal records. Of course, the caveat is that the person who donated the money must own an amount of land befitting of a noble. One example is the rich Mr. Sindras. He purchased the lowest area of land expected of a baron, 60,000 ares, then donated £100,000 to the Carlton Club and £400,000 to the Conservative Party, and donations to charity amounting to £300,000. Finally, he succeeded in receiving conferment from His Majesty and became a highly regarded baron. I've heard that there's a price list to this, £300,000 to become a baron and £700,000 to £1 million for a hereditary baron. There is no clear price for the title of Viscount or Count, but I'm sure those are sufficiently ridiculous. This year, many nobles who are facing financial difficulties are starting to seriously consider the possibility of marriages with wealthy merchants. There have already been 3 marriages like this over the last 2 months. The betrothal gifts the noble women received are something to be envied. Also, the workers who protested the Grain Act did experience a decrease in the cost of living, but the quality of their lives has not improved. Instead, it seems to have deteriorated as the bankrupt farmers have entered the city and stolen their jobs by requesting lower wages. Thus, the wages of the laborers are dropping rapidly. I remember the day when Father asked me who I felt was the winner of the Grain Act. My dear Alfred, you must know the answer. You would definitely be able to obtain a hereditary baron title through your own efforts. Zio Dericha and Furs Wall were returning to the Backlund Bridge Borough after they received Audrey's reply. Zio, with her messy blonde hair, was looking out the window of the carriage. Her eyes were bright like 2 burning balls of flame. She muttered the term, £450, to herself repeatedly, as if reciting an incantation. Her strength and courage grew every time she repeated the term. Darkholm hasn't reported the status of the investigation today. Let's make a trip to his house. Zio suddenly turned to look at Furs. Darkholm was the leader of a triad in the Backlund East Borough and had control over many beggars and thieves. Even though he looked very friendly with his chubby face that was perpetually adorned with a warm and amiable smile, Zio knew that he was a merciless scoundrel. He once broke the arm of a 13-year-old thief because the boy had hidden his profit. Unless it was necessary, Zio was unwilling to meet Darkholm, but Darkholm was one of the few people who were most familiar with the vagrants in the city. Furs pushed her slightly curly hair back behind her ear. As long as it doesn't delay my lunch. No problem. Perhaps I could treat you to an Intis feast after this week. Zio promised in complacency. Must I thank God? Furs asked as she laughed. Unlike Zio, Furs was a moderate believer of the god of steam and machinery. As they conversed, the two ladies switched to another public carriage and arrived at the Backlund East Borough, and arrived at Darkholm's house. It was a terrace house located in a narrow alley. There were green plants hanging from the walls, the exterior looked relatively unkempt. Zio walked to the door, raised her right hand and knocked in a unique rhythm. The unlocked door opened with a creak following her knocks. Zio's apparently confused expression immediately turned stern, like a wary lion's. She took out a bayonet she carried with her and cautiously pushed open the door. She then slowly stepped inside. Furs also stopped looking nonchalant, having produced a dagger of unknown origins. They didn't smell any peculiar scents, but their rich experience told them that something was off. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. Zio and Furs entered Darkholm's house. Then they saw a pale limb on a gas lamp, internal organs on a coffee table, as well as strips upon strips of flesh strewn on the floor and hung on the clothes rack. Pieces of bone had been stripped clean and piled up near the door. And amongst the bones was a head, its vacant eyes open. It was none other than Darkholm. His chubby face still maintained the amiable smile, as if everything was normal. Furthermore, there was no stench of blood in the house. As a former clinical doctor before becoming a best-selling author in Sequence 9 Beyonder, Furs has seen many death scenes more disgusting than this. She patted the tense Zio, who was on the brink of vomiting, as she surveyed the surroundings. Kalangos? Rear Admiral Hurricane Kalangos? He realized that Darkholm was investigating the missing vagrants and tracked him back to his house? Or could it be said that Darkholm had tracked him down, but ended up being caught? Zio fought back the urge to retch and said with a serious expression, "He sure lives up to his name as a merciless and crafty pirate admiral." The strangeness here also fits the description of his treasure. Crafty. Furs was suddenly alarmed as she blurted out, could he be waiting nearby in an ambush against the mastermind behind the investigations? Zio froze for a moment before answering in a fluster, "That's highly likely." He was a Sequence 6 Windblessed, a powerful pirate with a mystical artifact, while they were just 2 Sequence 9s. This was an extremely simple and easy contrast. In the house opposite Darkholm's house, a man with a unique broad chin and dark green eyes in his 30s was standing by the window, coldly observing Zio's and Furz's opening of the door and slow entry. He was none other than Rear Admiral Hurricane Kalangos. The black glove on his left hand twitched as if it were alive. A layer of dull gold scales appeared on its surface. Kalangos revealed a cruel and joyous expression as his dark green eyes turned pale gold and indifferent. The moment Furs realized this, she dragged Zio to the other side and avoided the area just across the main door. She then gritted her pearly white teeth and took out a bracelet that was hidden by her sleeves. This silver bracelet had 3 dark green, coarse stones which showed signs of burn marks and were rough and uneven. Furs pulled out one of the stones and let out a low growl in ancient Hermes, door. She grabbed onto Zio Dericha tightly as the stone released a faint blue glow. The figures of the two ladies turned indistinct, nearly invisible. They saw many forms they found difficult to describe. There were even transparent objects that didn't seem to exist. They saw different colors, lustrous splendors which seemed to possess immense knowledge. They had entered the mysterious spirit world. In this strange world that stood distinct from reality, Furs proceeded in a particular direction while pulling Zio along. Seconds later, they exited their indistinct states and returned to reality, to Backlund. But they were no longer at Darkholm's house, but instead arrived at an empty cemetery. Kalangos, who was wearing his scaled glove, silently appeared at the door of Darkholm's house. He swept the interior with his cold gaze. He froze for a moment, then creased his brows as he muttered to himself, "Traveler? In the cemetery. What are we going to do next?" Furs panted, sensing their predicament and feeling a lingering sense of fear. The bracelet was a mystical item she had received along with the formula for apprentice and its corresponding materials back during a fortuitous encounter of hers. Other than causing her to hear strange, faint murmurings during the full moon every month, it posed no threat. There were originally 5 stones on the bracelet, each stone allowing her to traverse through the spirit world, technically allowing her to teleport. But now, there were only 2 stones left. Zio calmed herself down and nodded solemnly. First notify Miss Audrey, then we call the police. Chapter 178, The Subsequent Ideas, Call the Police? Furs Wall repeated in surprise. To Beyonders, lodging a police report seemed to be something of another world. Zio paced back and forth as she tugged her coarse blonde hair. The scene of Darkholm's death is harrowing and creepy. As long as the police aren't blind, they would definitely pass the case on to the mandated punishers, the Nighthawks, the Machinery Hive Mind, or the Special Department of the military. When that happens, we can leak some more information and let them know that the murderer is Kalangos. At that point, the entire city will be chasing after him. Our goal is only to look for Kalangos, not to capture him. With the help of so many Beyonders, things would become much simpler and safer. Once Kalangos panics and makes a mistake, it would be our chance to claim our bounty. Heh, I'm referring to the discovery of his whereabouts. Zio laughed dryly and looked at the appalled Furs. Do you think that the only way I know to deal with problems is by charging into them headfirst? The difference between us and Kalangos is as vast as the Desi Bay. Furs nodded slowly and said, Your understanding of yourself is absolutely right. You've done too many things of a similar nature. Hence, the losses that you've suffered is sufficient for you to advance to Sequence 8. Luckily, you're still rational enough regarding this matter. Zio lowered her head to look at her bayonet. She thought for a moment and said, I have to be honest. I clearly sensed the approach of death earlier. Kalangos was no doubt nearby. That was an aura evil enough to destroy us at any time. That triggered an instinctual response in me. Furs wore her silver bracelet that had 2 stones left and thought seriously. I agree with your idea. Let's inform Miss Audrey first and lodge the police report after. Yes, regardless if it was Darkholm or his underlings who found Kalangos' traces, we could continue to investigate with that approach and find out Kalangos' activity range and the location of his residence. Zio creased her slim blonde eyebrows and said, But Kalangos would definitely not remain in the same place. Even as one of the 7 pirate admirals, even if he had the assistance of a mystical artifact, Kalangos had to be extremely careful in Backlund. Even Nast, the king of the 5 seas, had once encountered disaster here and was nearly caught. No, what I meant was, to surmise or confirm the purpose of Kalangos' visit to Backlund based on the clues. Once we know what he's trying to do, no matter how he disguises himself or what tricks he pulls, he'll be exposed to us in the end. Then, our mission would be accomplished, Furs explained in detail. 2 years of novel writing experience tells me that things would become simple once we grasp the crux of the matter. Zio looked at her best friend in shock. She couldn't believe the woman had just made such a logical statement. I'm different from you. I'm merely too lazy to think, while you think with your muscles. Furs pursed her lips, leaned her head sideways, and smiled. Teasing me doesn't make you smarter. Zio tried to smooth out her few strands of blonde hair that was sticking out. Alright, let's head over to Empress Burrow and tell Miss Audrey about this. Furs nodded faintly and said, So, what's our emergency contact method with Miss Audrey? Zio was momentarily put at a loss. She looked afar at the tombstone as she said, She told me that pet dog of hers we saw earlier walks herself at least 5 times a day. Well, the next walk should be after lunch. In other words, we have to loiter around suspiciously outside Count Hall's luxurious manor? The corner of Furs's lips twitched. Zio suddenly looked sideways and revealed an obsequious smile. Furs, or would you prefer to just sneak in? I don't think that would be difficult for you. It's what you're good at. A hereditary count for centuries, one of the most influential parliament members in the House of Lords, the largest shareholder of Varvat Bank, the fourth largest shareholder of Backland Bank, the special consultant of the Royal Bank of Loan, the third largest shareholder of Suchit Bank in the Intis Republic, the second largest shareholder of Constant Coal and Steel Consortium, and so on. These are the titles of Miss Audrey's father. Zio, use your brain. How could a man like that not employ any beyonders? Would he not have any prized collections? This is different from those destitute viscounts and barons. Furs replied in exasperation. I swear in the name of God, if I were to sneak in, would be discovered and caught within 5 minutes. Zio nodded continuously in agreement. Let's wait for the golden retriever then. With that said, she led the way. After she took a few steps forward, she spoke with her back facing Furs. Well, I will compensate you for your losses and the damages in the future. I'm referring to the stone, of course. Listening to that, the corner of Furs's lips lifted and she said, I was saving myself. And, Zio, you're going the wrong way. God, if you were an apprentice and ended up becoming a traveler in the future, it would be a disaster. Outside Count Hall's luxurious manor, Zio and Furs hid behind an Intis parasol tree and secretly observed their target building in silence, watching the people walking to and fro. After God knows how long, they finally saw the golden retriever come out from a hidden hole under the wall. It pricked up its ears and looked to its left and right, appearing very cautious. Just as Susie started taking its walk happily, a black male dog popped up from nowhere. It fawned on Susie and started running around in circles. This is the first time I'm seeing a dog show such a human-like reaction. Just how much does it hate that black dog? Zio sighed. She could tell from Susie's gaze and facial expression that there was obvious detest. Furs smiled and said, it's just like encountering a rash, disgusting, and persistent lecher. Seeing Susie attempt to speed up to escape the black dog's pursuit, Zio stood up to administer justice. My ruling is for you to leave her alone. Zio shouted with a mask of solemnity. The black dog was taken aback and immediately scampered away with its tail between its legs. Susie let out a breath of relief and slowed down. It barked politely and wagged its tail. That was close, I nearly said thank you to them. The golden retriever thought in joy. That would have been a very awkward situation. A melodic tune slowly came to a halt as Audrey picked up the latest intelligence Zio and Furs had delivered and read it with knitted brows. She closed the piano cover and stood up elegantly. She paced back and forth in her piano room and considered her next course of action. Kalengos is a very dangerous man. If Zio and Furs continued investigating, they might end up in danger. It might even expose me. Yes, I should just proceed according to their suggestion. Oh yeah, it's another 2 hours until the Tarot Club. I wonder what Mr. Fool would suggest. If he's still not interested, I'll discuss it with the hanged man carefully. Audrey gradually calmed herself down. This was the first time she had encountered, or perhaps was described as being placed in such a perilous situation. There was already 1 death. 3 in the afternoon. Audrey's vision recovered from a crimson and blurry state before seeing the boundless gray fog that didn't belong to reality, the lofty palace that looked like the home of a giant, the long ancient mottled bronze table, and the fool who was always engulfed by a thick layer of fog. Lastly, she saw the hanged man and the sun. At that moment, Audrey's tense and anxious emotions seemed to relax. She felt so safe, so calm. I'm participating in the tarot club that doesn't belong in the material world, and I'm dealing with Mr. Fool who's nearly a god. Kalengos and I are on different levels. Audrey sat in an upright position proudly. She lifted her chin slightly and greeted cheerfully, Good afternoon, Mr. Fool. Good afternoon, Mr. Hanged Man. Good afternoon, Mr. Sun. After they greeted one another, Klein saw that Miss Justice was indicating her desire to speak. Therefore, he nodded faintly to express his permission. Honorable Mr. Fool, I wonder if your adorer has received the compensation of £300? Audrey asked, holding back her urge to talk about Kalengos while she showed concern over her leader's adorer. Klein smiled and said, I didn't pay close attention to this matter. But as my adorer didn't request for additional help, I suppose he has already received it. Yes, I've checked multiple times. There are £300 lying in my anonymous bank account. Klein added in his head happily. That's great. Audrey relaxed and looked across her. Mr. Hanged Man, there's been progress regarding Kalangos. Alger suddenly sat up straight. He couldn't hide his excitement as he asked, where is he? Unfortunately, he noticed our investigations just after we discovered his tracks. He killed one of the personnel involved. Audrey repeated the highlights of Zio's and Furza's story and explained their follow-up plan in detail. Alger nodded faintly and said, I'll pay close attention. Then, he turned to the side and looked towards the seat of honor at the long bronze table. Under the vacant gaze of the son, Derek, who listened but didn't understand anything, he said, Honorable Mr. Fool, if I were to find out Kalango's true intention and the very important and magical item that he intends to obtain, please allow me to recite your name and inform you through the ritual. He didn't repeat his request for the fool's adorer to provide him assistance. As he brought it up before and the fool had given his answer, there was no need to harp on the topic. Otherwise, it might provoke the god. Hence, Alger made it clear that his intention was only to report his findings. If the final temptation was sufficient, he believed that Mr. Fool's adorer would definitely appear. That works? Audrey widened her eyes. I should have asked for the right to report as well. I might be able to gain Mr. Fool's guidance occasionally. She thought with regret. Under everyone's gaze, Klein leaned back into his chair and nodded faintly. He replied slowly, You may. Chapter 179, Praising Mr. Fool. Alger heaved a sigh of relief when he heard the fool's answer. He lowered his head and humbly said, Please allow me to thank you in advance. That's because I'm also curious about the item Kalangos is searching for. I want to know about the item that can allow a Sequence 6 Wind Blessed to have the strength of a Sequence 4. I'm also curious about what a pirate admiral is going to do in Backlund. Klein smiled, maintaining his profound posture. It's not like I've promised to provide assistance after I hear your prayers. He emphasized in his heart. But now, he was a lot more confident than before. Now, he had actual allies and the mysterious Mr. Azik who was currently in Backlund. If it was absolutely necessary, Klein was willing to use the bronze whistle to enlist the help of Azik. Of course, he definitely wouldn't mention the Tarot Club. He would probably say he got information from some random source. There were still two problems that existed in this matter. First, Klein was only limited to a cooperative relationship with Azik. It wasn't necessarily the case that Azik would provide assistance unless he was interested in what Kalangos was doing or the mystical item that he was after. Second, Klein was unsure of just how powerful Azik was. Even if he had made the assumption that Azik was a high-sequence beyonder, he had to consider the fact that his memory loss might have weakened his abilities. After all, knowledge was usually equated with power, and the lack of knowledge would definitely diminish Azik's power. If that was the case, Klein couldn't guarantee that Azik could deal with Kalangos, especially with the latter wielding the creeping hunger. Klein was afraid that he would be placing Azik in danger, so he was unwilling to trouble Azik unless he absolutely had to. Now that I think about it, Mr. Azik's terrifying messenger can be summoned with the bronze whistle. No, that thing doesn't look like a messenger at all. It could take the role of an evil boss. So, even if Mr. Azik cannot beat the creeping hunger augmented Kalangos, he should be able to defend himself easily and have enough power left to save the Hanged Man, Miss Justice, and her partners. Klein shifted his posture as he thought, still leaning against the back of his chair. He propped his right leg over his left. The Hanged Man. Alger looked at the fool and spoke once again, I'm about to receive a batch of pages from Emperor Rosel's diary. I believe that I can present them to you in the next gathering, or the gathering after that. According to the arrangement of the Church of the Lord of Storms, Pritz Harbor was under the jurisdiction of the Backlund Diocese. Thus, Alger could enter the capital and wait for Rear Admiral Hurricane Kalangos to show himself under the guise of reporting about his previous voyage. Backland had been the headquarters of the Church of the Lord of Storms until the end of the last epoch, having shifted their holy altar to Pasu Island only after the establishment of the Lone Kingdom. Regardless, the status of the Church of the Lord of Storms in Backland was second only to the headquarters of the 7 great churches. One could imagine the information the Church of the Lord of Storms held. Under these circumstances, Alger was confident that he would be able to collect pages of Emperor Rosel's diary in the name of research. After all, they were indecipherable at present. Klein allowed joy to color his tone, as he said with a gentle nod, "Very good." What he was really feeling right now was a mix of joy and worry. He was happy that he could see several pages of Emperor Rosel's diary soon. They might contain a lot of useful information, but he was also worried about what he had to give the hanged man in return. After all, no one knew if the hanged man would be interested in the contents of the diary, or if the content was valuable enough. Even a seer is unable to determine that in advance. Must I really let my adorer help him? Klein gave a silent sigh. Audrey Hall hurriedly spoke up when she saw the conversation between the hanged man and the fool end. "Honorable Mr. Fool, may I recite your name and inform you using a ritual should I receive any timely and useful information?" Timely. Look, Miss Justice's choice of words is so refined. Compared to her, you are too vulgar, the hanged man. Klein nodded slightly, saying past the fog, "You may." Great. Audrey secretly clenched her fists. At the same time, Klein turned to look at the son, Derek Berg, who had been silently listening to their conversations. He spoke, his tone was peaceful. "The same goes for you as well." "Yes, Mr. Fool." Derek lowered his head. The majestic palace was silent for a few seconds before Audrey spoke. "I need the complete pituitary gland of a rainbow salamander. One of the main ingredients of the telepathist potion." Hanged man Alger nodded slightly as if he was contemplating. "I don't have it. To be honest, I've only seen this creature in textbooks." The son, Derek, heard the term automatically translated to him as phantom netherdrake. What kind of textbook would discuss a supernatural creature? How envious. I can only get information like that at a Beyonder gathering, through word of mouth, or through a crumpled piece of paper. There's no system in place, and my search for knowledge lacks organization. I'll find a way to trade for the son's textbook in the future. Oh, he was interested in the formula for the Bard potion. Audrey thought, a little envious. At that moment, Alger looked at the fool, then retracted his gaze. He then looked opposite him and said in thought, "I might have a way of obtaining the complete pituitary gland of the rainbow salamander." Without waiting for Audrey to speak, he added on, "But it's under the premise that Kalangos is found. When the time comes, the complete pituitary gland of the rainbow salamander would be equivalent to the extra compensation that I owe you. Miss Justice, you might not know, but these creatures are nearly extinct, and we can only find traces of them in primitive islands in the Sea of Fog, the Berserk Sea, or the Sonia Sea. Not many people have the coordinates to these islands. If you're interested, we can make a deal, for I am one of the few who knows how to get there. I'm also interested in those primitive islands." Klein silently listened to their conversation. Thinking about the extinction of the rainbow salamander, he suddenly recalled the joke he cracked with old Neil, the Dragons and Giants Protection Association. He let out a sigh in his heart. Audrey became thrilled after hearing that. She fought back her emotions as she said, "I once dreamed of going on a voyage in search of these primitive islands to take in the history. My goddess, the Tarot Club is too powerful, too wonderful. To be able to recruit a member who has the coordinates of the primitive islands. Praise Mr. Fool." Audrey couldn't maintain her spectator state as a smile crept across her face. Primitive islands? Klein froze for a moment, then thought about a page of Emperor Rosel's diary that he had seen, the one where the emperor described himself as a pirate king. He said that he discovered an unnamed island with many supernatural creatures when he and his 4 horsemen of the apocalypse were traversing the Sea of Fog on an unsafe sea route. Could that be the so-called primitive island? How unfortunate, the great emperor didn't include any coordinates in his diary. Perhaps the information will be in some future pages, but as of now, I haven't received any pages of his diary in chronological order. Klein was filled with regret and anticipation. The son Derek was already confused by the terms Sea of Fog, Berserk Sea, Sonia Sea, Primitive Island, etc. He felt more and more certain that Miss Justice and Mr. Hanged Man belonged to a different world than he did. After collecting herself for a few seconds, Audrey asked curiously, "Does the near extinction of the rainbow salamander mean that the spectator pathway will be severed soon?" "No, there will definitely be substitute materials." Alger gave a definite answer. "What substitute materials are there?" Audrey's eyes brightened as she asked. Alger shook his head, replying without revealing certain profound truths, "I don't know. Perhaps the members of the psychology alchemists might know." "Then how can you be so sure that there will be substitute ingredients?" Audrey didn't understand. Alger laughed and said, "You will understand in time. Or do you have something to trade for the information right now?" "I guess I'll wait." Audrey pouted and sighed. She also dismissed the idea of asking Mr. Fool. "There's no use in me knowing for the time being. The Hanged Man will definitely ask about something regarding Rear Admiral Hurricane, and I cannot be dragged too deep into that matter." She suddenly felt like praising her intellect. But what she never expected was that Mr. Fool was feeling very disappointed at that moment. Klein was rather curious about the secrets which Alger's words held. Unfortunately, Miss Justice, who was the best assist all this while, didn't choose to go through with the transaction. No matter what method they chose to perform a transaction, the contents of the deal couldn't be hidden from the owner of the fog. Well, even if the rainbow salamander is nearing extinction, the psychology alchemists are still giving out formulas listing it as an ingredient instead of providing a substitute. Does this mean that the psychology alchemists are in possession of the coordinates of certain primitive islands? Or could they be working together with an organization that has the coordinates? Klein wondered. After the end of the transaction discussions, Klein looked around, then turned to the sun. He asked in a gentle tone, "Does the City of Silver still believe in gods?" Klein was merely an official member of the Nighthawks and had no access to deeper mysticism knowledge. An example would be sacrificial rituals. Thus, in order to refine his understanding of performing sacrificing dedicated to himself, to move materials in the mysterious space above the gray fog, as a sequence 8, Klein needed to learn it as soon as possible from other sources. He came up with 3 methods after continuous consideration. First, he was going to ask Spirit Guide Daly, who was adept at ritualistic magic whilst also being a deacon. But this might invite suspicion from her, thus, Klein could only patiently wait for an opportunity. Second, he could ask Mr. Azik, but Klein couldn't guarantee that he would be able to recall the knowledge in this area. Third, he was going to use a roundabout way to ask Sun, who lived in the City of Silver. Klein already had an idea of how he was going to do it while effectively maintaining his image. Whatever he asked would be tied to the gods. Derek replied in a respectful tone, "We still believe in the Lord that created everything, the omnipotent and omniscient God." Chapter 180, A smart person always overthinks. Upon hearing the fool's question, Audrey perked up her ears and entered her spectator state. She waited for the sun to answer. She had always been curious about where the City of Silver was and what was so special about that place, but she couldn't bring herself to ask. It touched upon his privacy after all. At that moment, Mr. Fool was asking personally. It was like finishing the first volume of an outstanding detective novel she had been reading for a long time, and she finally had the chance to buy the next volume. The Sun's answer didn't disappoint her. They didn't believe in the mainstream 7 orthodox deities, nor did they believe in death as the southern continent did. They also didn't believe in the hidden existences, evil gods or devils, primordial demonis, hidden sage, dark side of the universe, chained god, or the true creator, which the Hanged Man had told her before. The City of Silver is really special. They actually worship the creator himself. This is the primordial worship that Mr. Hanged Man described, right? The description of omnipotence is a little strange. Audrey stole a glance at the Hanged Man subconsciously and realized that he was nodding slightly. Klein wasn't surprised at all. He purposely chuckled and asked in reply, even though he abandoned you? Abandoned? The Creator abandoned the City of Silver? Alger was shocked. Suddenly he made the connection regarding a particular term. The Forsaken Land of the Gods. In the confidential information of the Church of the Lord of Storms, at the security clearance level that Alger, who was captain, equivalent to the bishop level, could access, the Forsaken Land of the Gods had always only been a name with no actual description. However, it clearly pointed towards the end of the Sonia Sea. From what he knew, even the cardinals at the core of the church had no idea what the Forsaken Land of the Gods represented. But only the leader of the church, the proxy of the Lord of Storms, knew something about the situation and seemed to be taking charge of the hidden mission to look for the Forsaken Land of the Gods. Alger had once made a bold guess when he equated the true Creator's holy residence, which was promoted by the Aurora Order, with the Forsaken Land of the Gods. But, unfortunately, the fool hadn't confirmed his guess, so he couldn't be sure. Now, he was shocked and surprised to find that the Tarot Club member using the sun as his code name was very likely from the Forsaken Land of the Gods. Mr. Fool knew where the Forsaken Land of the Gods was all this time, and he could pull someone from there to be a member of the gathering. This is a hidden place that the Church of the Lord of Storms has been trying to find to no avail. Alger looked at the fool who was seated in the seat of honor at the end of the ancient long bronze table in horror. He could only see that he was leaning back in his chair in silence, engulfed by the thick fog. Audrey wasn't particularly moved about it. The only time that she had heard about the Forsaken Land of the Gods was from the Hanged Man's question. She wasn't particularly interested, so she failed to associate it to anything from what Mr. Fool said earlier. The City of Silver has the legend about being abandoned by the Creator. Mr. Hanged Man seems to be deeply affected. What is he amazed and afraid of? Audrey nodded in puzzlement as she remembered the details of the moment. Yes, we believe that we will regain the Lord's favor in the end. Perhaps it will be on the day the sun rises again, Derek Berg answered in an uncertain tone. We were once ruled by the giant's royal family, and we worshipped the giant King Ormer. Later, we were saved by the Lord, and we will never betray the Lord again. Ruled by the giant's royal family. It really is ancient. But it doesn't seem to match. Alger, who had guessed at something, suddenly recalled the description about the second epoch in the hidden chapter of the Book of Storms. The second epoch was also known as humanity's dark epoch. At the time, the sky, ocean, and land were ruled over by dragons, giants, elves, mutants, devils, phoenixes, demonic wolves, and dead spirits. But in the end, the Lord of Storms, eternal blazing sun, and the God of knowledge and wisdom led humanity into defeating the supernatural creatures and ushered in the beginning of the third epoch, the glorious era, which was later known as Cataclysm. Giant King Ormer. Klein repeated the name in silence. In various legends and myths, it was a great existence on par with the deities. Even now, there were still some places that worshipped him. Even the most famous and most expensive grape wine in the Intis Republic was named after Ormer. It was said that the giant king particularly fancied grape wine, which was like blood. Considering the fact that the Church of the God of Combat is in control of the complete pathway of the warrior, which once belonged to the giants, can I assume that Ormer was the ancient god of combat? Klein guessed. He nodded deliberately but didn't think any further about it. He then asked calmly, do you still offer sacrifices to this omnipotent God? Yes, we still do. But since the day we were abandoned, we have never gotten any response. Derek's voice had a hint of unconcealed pain. Klein leaned against the back of his chair leisurely. He half closed his eyes and said, describe the process of your offering ritual in detail. Does Mr. Fool want to figure out the truth behind the City of Silver's abandonment? Or does he want to determine if the Creator still exists? Alger suddenly felt a shock through his body and he quivered. Not only was he afraid, but he was also excited too. This was because he felt he was being made privy to the secrets between deities. That made him feel like he had been elevated to a whole new level. I've been chasing after power, after strength. Didn't I do it to achieve this kind of feeling? Alger leaned back, lifted his chin, and got carried away with his thoughts. Mr. Hanged Man's mental state doesn't seem to be normal. Audrey looked at him with pity. She finally understood that there might be some sort of shocking secret behind the communication between Mr. Fool and the son, which led to the Hanged Man's loss of composure. After the Kalengo's commission is over, I'll pay the price to get information about what Mr. Hanged Man learned today. I wonder if he would be willing to. Audrey thought in anticipation, yet was still a little worried. Derek didn't notice the weight that was hanging on his answer as he replied frankly, "We build opulent altars covered in the Lord's symbol. Every time we receive a bumper black-faced grass harvest, we hold a sacrificial ritual. We use the monsters we capture in the depths of the darkness to use as sacrificial offerings. After we recite God's honorable title and the necessary prayers, we dance for him and then kill the monsters, to let their spirituality and tainted blood dye the entire altar. If we haven't caught any monsters, then we use a sinner on the lowest floor in the City of Silver prison instead. Then, we turn the very first batch of black-faced grass into food and serve it before the Lord. In the end, we sing praises in unison and end the ritual. Since I was planning to offer a sacrifice to myself, I'm not picky about time, and the altar can be as simple as possible. The most important part would be to open a channel with the aid of the monster spirituality or the blood-containing Beyonder powers to complete the sacrifice offering. Of course, this is under the premise that one will receive a response. How extravagant. Klein used his mysticism knowledge to analyze every step of the sacrificial ritual in the City of Silver before finally saying, "What are the corresponding prayers? What language do you recite them in?" Derek was also looking forward to this, so as to gain hints from Mr. Fool on how to shake off the curse, so he recalled it carefully and answered, "We use Jotun, which is also our common language. The corresponding prayers are, your devoted believers pray for your attention. We pray for you to take their offerings. We pray for you to open the gates to your kingdom." Klein listened in silence and intentionally let the engulfing fog slowly swirl around him. He nodded as though deep in thought and remained silent. As for what he learned from it, he obviously wouldn't share it. Alger found it very normal. How could the secrets of a deity be revealed directly to a mortal? Derek also steeled his resolve to quickly grow in power, so that he could obtain something that could garner Mr. Fool's interest in exchange for his guidance. After some more communication, Klein ended the gathering. He watched Justice's, the Hanged Man's, and the Sun's figures vanish before him. He looked down and saw the boundless gray fog and crimson stars that seemed eternally immutable. However, after he advanced to sequence 8, he realized that he could connect even more stars. In other words, he could pull in more members. At least 2. Klein nodded indiscernibly. He wasn't in a hurry to add new members. He planned to act as he had before. He would first wait and observe. If Justice and the Hanged Man had any recommendations, he could assess them first. What I saw the last few times was when the sun was praying. There was a clear crystal ball before him, but ever since I pulled him into the world above the gray fog, that crystal ball has never appeared again. Does the prerequisite needed to pull people in through the connection of the Crimson Star have something to do with having a special item around them? Or does every Crimson Star correspond to an item in reality, which, when it's connected successfully, it would return to the world above the gray fog? I wondered if Miss Justice and Mr. Hanged Man were the same. Let's just assume that's the case. In that case, if people without this special item were to recite, "The fool that doesn't belong to this era, the mysterious ruler above the gray fog, the king of yellow and black who wields good luck," and allow me to hear their prayers, would I be able to pull them in? I can give it a try in the future. Klein didn't stay any longer. He wrapped himself with spirituality and stimulated a descent, leaving behind the lofty palace, the ancient table, and the 22 high-backed chairs which sat immutably above the gray fog. He had mastered the overflowing power of the clown potion and eliminated the corresponding negative effects. Therefore, he wanted to try the ritual to summon himself. I wonder what I'll conjure this time. Klein thought in anticipation and fear as he fell through the mad ravings. Chapter 181, different state. Klein didn't hurry to dispel the wall of spirituality when he returned to his room. Instead, he expertly took out a candle infused with sandalwood and placed it in the middle of his desk. He then followed the steps for the ritual, lighting up the candle with his spirituality and scattering essences, extract, and herb powder, herbs symbolizing good luck and mystery. He saw the flame alternate between being dull and bright as he took in the fragrance of peace and harmony. Klein took 2 steps back and looked at the candle on the table. He then shouted in the language of the giants, "I." After a pause, he switched to Hermes, "I summon in my name, the fool that doesn't belong to this era, the mysterious ruler above the gray fog, the king of yellow and black who wields good luck." At that moment, the flickering flame fused itself with the harmonious scent to form an illusory vortex, a vortex that manically absorbed the spirituality. After Klein finished reciting the incantations, the vortex stabilized to become a palm-sized circle of grayish-white fog. After observing the fog, Klein took 4 steps counterclockwise without hesitation. He returned to the world above the fog, and as he expected, he saw ripples of light spreading from his high-back chair, accentuating the mysterious aura of the weird symbol, the pupilless eye and partially contorted lines, on his chair. He took in a deep breath and calmed his soul down using cogitation before extending his hand toward the target. At that moment, he heard the incantations that he had just recited. He saw the surging spirituality and the rippling light fuse to form an illusory door. Compared to the previous time, the door was now completely formed and was etched full of mysterious patterns. The patterns were the same as the symbol on the back of the fool's chair, a symbol made up of the pupilless eye and the partially contorted lines. As he looked at the door, Klein focused his mind and willed the door open. Without warning, ripples formed in the eternally immutable grayish-white fog and the majestic palace, like a stone being cast in a peaceful pond. The ripple spread in the direction of the door of summoning. The sound of heavy scraping sound caused by friction could suddenly be heard. A slit appeared in the heavy, mysterious door. Beyond it, one could faintly see an immensely dark world, filled with countless indescribable, transparent figures. There were also streaks of different colors, lustrous splendor that harbored infinite knowledge. At that moment, Klein felt an unimaginable, irresistible attractive force coming from beyond the door. He couldn't help but get pulled towards it. "Damn! Are you not giving me the choice?" Just as he had that alarming thought, his body went through the slit and vanished into the darkness behind the door. The dizzying, maniacal roars gradually died down. Klein finally came to his senses. He saw a young man in front of him. The man was wearing an old shirt, had black hair, brown eyes, and average-looking facial features. The man had an average build, was a little skinny, but his frame seemed to hide considerable power. He also had the obvious demeanor of a scholar. "Isn't that me?" Klein wasn't a stranger to scenes like this. He encountered something like this every time he looked in the mirror. He nodded indiscernibly and surveyed his surroundings. He saw his bed with a white bedsheet draped over it. He saw his half-top hat, tuxedo, and black windbreaker hanging on his clothes rack. He saw a bookshelf with quite a number of books, his neat table that only had one candle on it. He saw the candle flame emitting a grayish-white glow. And now, he was floating in front of the palm-sized circle of grayish-white fog. So, have I really summoned myself? It feels a little like an out-of-body experience, but there's also something a little different. Klein looked at the physical body belonging to him, toward his blank, vacant eyes and slipped into deep thought. But he could finally confirm one thing: it was only his soul, also known as his spirit body in mysticism, that headed to the world of fog. The exterior appearance was that of the astral projection. It's no wonder that I can directly see the astral projection surface of Justice, the Hanged Man, and the Sun and confirm whether they were beyonders or not when I was in the world above the fog. I could also guess their sequence numbers. My physical body seems to be under some form of protection, perhaps from the power of the ritual, for me to stand with such stability and not lose my balance. It should be the same for Miss Justice and the others. Klein slowly got used to the current situation and started to analyze the conditions of both his physical body and soul. He retracted his gaze and tried to move his soul, now fused with powers from the mysterious space. Whoosh! A cold wind started to blow, as it spiraled around the room. Klein savored the sensation of flying, joyfully making circles in the room. I can also take on the role of a messenger in this city now. I wonder if I can carry physical items with me. He collected himself and stopped. He floated in the air and experimented with his other abilities. He tried to grab a notebook from his bookshelf, but his hand passed through it. It feels a little sticky, it's not like moving through air. I might be able to grab it after I become more powerful and able to better utilize the mysterious powers of the world above the gray fog. Klein once again tried grabbing a single piece of paper but to no avail. After more than 10 seconds of deliberation, he flew toward the clothes rack and extended his transparent hand into the pocket of his black windbreaker. He touched the slumber charms and the requiem charms that he replenished from a successful claim. They were objects infused with his own spirituality, different from ordinary objects in supernatural terms. Thus, Klein wanted to see if he could carry them about. His palm once again went through the charms, but he could clearly feel their existence. He felt the intertwining of spirituality, but he didn't have enough strength to pick them up. Of course, another explanation was that there wasn't enough spirituality within the charms to achieve a strong resonance with his current state. The spirituality isn't strong enough, Klein thought as he moved towards the other pocket. That pocket stored the flaring sun charms that he made with the stolen power of the divine blood and his own spirituality. A warm sensation quickly spread all over his body, making his form turn more stable and his thoughts clearer. He could take the thin gold piece out of his pocket. In the mirror in his room, the charms seemed to float out of the pocket on its own accord, similar to the descriptions in ghost stories. I can move flaring sun charms. I can also create sound using my spirituality. So I do have certain abilities in this state. Klein flew toward the mirror and stopped in front of it. He saw that only the thin gold piece was reflected. Other than that, it was only the furniture and darkness in the room caused by the drawn curtains. After a few seconds of consideration, he placed the flaring sun charm onto the bed before returning to the front of the mirror. He wanted to see if he could move through the mirror. His vision turned dark. Klein's vantage point suddenly changed. He saw the room that was reflected in the mirror, the furniture that was accentuated by the weak sources of light. It made him feel as though he was hiding in an obscure corner, peeping into a tiny portion of the room. I really can go through the mirror. But this is only an ordinary item which doesn't lead to some mysterious and strange world. Klein nodded and charged forward, once again returning to his room. The success of carrying the flaring sun charm gave him immense confidence. Hence, he attempted grabbing something else. Mr. Azik's copper whistle. The moment he touched the ancient and intricate object, he felt his spirituality expanding and freezing. His illusory eyes turned into dark, burning flames. It feels like I have gotten a little more powerful. My form is like a wraith's but without the strong sense of vengeance. Klein projected his current appearance by calming his mind. This was one of the abilities of a clown. Mr. Azik's copper whistle is truly fascinating. He nodded, noticing that he could now pick up pieces of paper with certain weights. He could also pick up his slumber charms. How unfortunate. I can carry the silver ritual dagger, but the revolver is too heavy. Klein concluded his experiments and turned to see if he could use any spells in this state. After serious tests, he concluded that he could conjure 2 spells. The first being a formless howl could shake the souls of his target, and the second was inducing a state akin to freezing via contact with a target. Klein came to a satisfied stop. He looked out the oriel window, towards the sunlight and street covered by the curtain. I wonder if I can move about during the day in this state. He muttered as he floated towards the window. He then carefully lifted the curtain, creating a slit and allowing a small amount of sunlight to pass through the wall of spirituality and into the room. Under the radiant sunlight, Klein felt his soul boil with a black fog. His powers were also being drained away, bit by bit. He quickly released his grip, allowing the curtain to block the light. I can't. Klein thought for a moment, then placed his gaze on the flaring sun charm on the bed. I wonder if the effect would be the same if I'm augmented with the divine blood of the eternal blazing sun? He floated toward the bed and tried to grab the thin piece of gold. But just as he touched the charm, the warm pure feeling formed a stark contrast with his burgeoning cold spirituality. It was like an existential conflict between fire and water. Sizzle. He tossed the piece of gold away as if he had been burned. The power of Mr. Azik's copper whistle cannot inhabit my soul at the same time as the flaring sun charm. Klein understood as he set the copper whistle down. He felt his spirituality shrink, and the black flames in his eyes extinguished. In this state, both the spells I can use have been weakened. After another round of experimentation, Klein grabbed the flaring sun charm, once again feeling the stabilizing and warm purifying effects the charm had on his spirit body. He returned to the window and cautiously moved through the curtain. The sunlight only felt warm on his body, but it didn't inflict any harm. Not bad. Klein let out a mixed smile. He made his way past the wall of spirituality and cautiously flew out of the house with the intention of conducting more experiments. Chapter 182, Wanderer Klein. The weather in Tianjin turned from refreshing cool to a bitingly chill in early September. However, the sunlight at 3 or 4 in the afternoon was still warm and soothing. Klein went through the wall of spirituality and the oriel window. He floated in the air outside of his bedroom as he overlooked the people and carriages shuttling to and fro Daffodil Street. Just then, there was a man in a gray labor uniform who suddenly lifted his head and looked over. Klein panicked and wanted to hide, but he couldn't find any suitable cover. When he didn't see anything to hide behind, he started to sneak back into his house. However, from the corner of his eye, he saw the man earlier merely glanced over the window. Then, his gaze followed a flying sparrow, but unfortunately, he lost sight of it. In Tianjin, birds could occasionally be seen. Phew. I forgot that an ordinary person wouldn't be able to see me. Klein let out a breath of relief and felt that he had yet to get used to the situation. As he grew more confident, he flew lower and went to a nearby spacious street where he floated above people's heads. As he drew closer, Klein immediately realized that his vision was the same as his spirit vision. There was no need for him to activate it, but there was a restriction to its range. Also, besides the aura and emotional colors, he could faintly feel the existence of everyone's soul. They were blurry, illusory, and transparent. In this state, I think I could bypass a person's body and directly attack their soul. Klein nodded thoughtfully. He circled around and prepared to test his fastest speed. Hence, he flew towards Iron Cross Street with all his strength. It didn't take long before he came to a halt and arrived outside the apartment he used to stay in. It should be about the speed of a car on the highway. It's a pity that I still can't go in and out of the spirit world, otherwise, it'd be perfect. But if I were to be lost in the spirit world, it's said that the consequences are very severe. Just as Klein finished his self-evaluation, he felt low-spirited and gloomy. There was an unspoken pressure. He looked around and felt that Iron Cross Street was engulfed with gloominess that ordinary people could see, a darkness that the sunlight couldn't dispel. There were layers of numbness, despair, pain, and other emotions overlapping, as though they were corporeal. It feels just like what I experienced when using spiritual perception on this street when I first became a seer. Iron Cross Street's Middle Street and Lower Street hasn't changed to this day. I wonder how many years it took to accumulate such oppression and gloominess. Klein recalled the past and sighed as he flew up to the 3rd floor of the surrounding buildings. He finally felt sunlight and shook off his depression. Klein flew along Lower Street and, from time to time, he would see residents who were dressed in tattered clothes, looking expressionless and malnourished. He even ran into 2 bodies that had died of natural causes, prolonged starvation and malnutrition with a sudden infliction of an illness. There were countless people who died in agony every month. However, the bankrupt farmers and slaves that surged in from the southern continent replaced them very quickly. Klein sighed in silence and changed direction and flew south. That was the industrial area of Tianjin. The steelworks, lead factories, ceramic factories, printing factories, metalworks factories, machine construction factories, and other factories all built right next to one another. As he flew, Klein saw towering chimneys. He saw dust filling the air and a thick gloominess that was only slightly better than that of Lower Street. It was crowded with emotions of exhaustion, pain, pessimism, and numbness. Laborers who were in their 30s were considered the minority. Just as Klein wanted to fly lower to look at the area more closely, he suddenly felt weak. It was a weakness that came from inside him. My spirituality can't withstand the duress. Klein became alarmed. He was in a hurry to return home, but he suddenly thought of a better possibility. I was summoned out. If I were to end the summon, would return naturally. He calmed down and carefully felt the surrounding environment and his status. Unsurprisingly, he discovered something that was connected to him from infinitely far away but also infinitely close to him. It formed an intricate tether to him. Through this connection, Klein clenched the flaring sun charm tightly and willed the strong desire to end the summoning. A massive and terrifying suction force overwhelmed him as his figure went from transparent to nearly invisible, and in a flash, he vanished from the corporeal world. Silence was everywhere in the boundless gray fog, and there were illusory crimson stars that twinkled. Klein reappeared in the lofty palace that looked like the home of a giant, as he sat in the seat of honor at the ancient bronze table. The entire procedure went well. Furthermore, Klein looked at his spirit body in pleasant surprise and saw that it contained a warm and pure gold portion. The flaring sun charm. I actually brought something corporeal into the world above the gray fog. He held the charm with a smile and fiddled with it to make sure it wasn't an illusory item. Klein stood up and paced back and forth, feeling completely gratified. He thought to himself in anticipation. As expected, ingredients and items can be brought into this mysterious space. I just need to find the correct way. However, this method is quite complicated. It needs me to do quite a bit before it reaches the destination. Furthermore, if I were to be summoned by the members all the time, it would damage the fool's image. I can only do that occasionally, or after I understand it more. I can design an incantation that summons the fool's adorer, but it will similarly be directed at me. I'm not some born laborer. Why must the incantation point towards me? When the time comes, I can conjure what seems like a messenger or a more unique adorer, and let it deal with the dispatch and collection of materials. Ideas popped up one after another as Klein contemplated. But due to the limitation of his capabilities and knowledge, he couldn't put them into practice just yet. As he became even weaker, Klein didn't dare to stay any longer. He used his spirituality to envelop himself and simulate the feeling of descending. In the blink of an eye, he returned to his bedroom. He saw splendid sunlight pouring in through the gap in his curtains. He examined his body and made sure that the flaring sun charm wasn't brought back but left above the gray fog. When I've gotten enough rest, I'll repeat the summoning ritual at dawn to bring the flaring sun charm back to reality. Sigh, it would be great if I could maintain the state a little longer. That way, I would be able to investigate the houses with red chimneys. It's such a pity that I can't do it yet. I could only fly long enough to investigate a few houses before having to return above the gray fog and rest for half a day. The efficiency would be just as low. Klein walked before his desk and put out the silent burning candle. After he packed his things, he didn't remove the wall of spirituality immediately. Instead, he sat down and took out a pen and paper to write a letter to Mr. Azik. After he wrote the salutation of "Dear Sir," he pondered for a few minutes before penning. I recently received news that one of the 7 pirate admirals, Rear Admiral Hurricane, Kalangos, has infiltrated Backland. He carries a mystical item called the Creeping Hunger. It provides an ability similar to a shepherd, which is a sequence 5 beyonder that swallows different souls and obtains their corresponding powers. It's said that there is a limit to the number of souls that one can let out to graze, but the souls can be swapped out. Kalangos seems to have many beyonder powers, and I'm not sure what he's trying to do in Backland. The news I received suggested that he might be after a very important, very mystical item that could make Kalangos a high-sequence beyonder or as powerful as a high-sequence beyonder. Klein fabricated his source of information to generally describe the situation with Kalangos, but it wasn't like Mr. Azik would look for a Nighthawk captain to confirm it. Klein didn't directly request assistance but made it seem like he brought up the subject casually to encourage Azik to be careful. Regardless of whether Mr. Azik was willing to help, it wouldn't hurt to first lay the foundations. If Klein eventually needed to ask for help, it wouldn't appear out of the blue that way. Klein let out a breath slowly and started writing the main content of the letter. The mastermind behind all that has happened hasn't taken any further action, and I still haven't found any related clues. The reason why I'm contacting you so suddenly is mainly to ask for your guidance regarding sacrificial rituals. I came across something like that during a recent mission, with the son's description and Mr. Azik's answer to compare. Should be able to try a sacrificial ritual after that. By reversing the ritual, I should be able to bestow items. This would be a more suitable ritual for exchanging ingredients and items rather than summoning myself. Yes, let's hope that Mr. Azik remembers the knowledge about this. Klein nodded slightly. He put down his pen without signing his name. There's only one copper whistle, so I'm sure Mr. Azik wouldn't make a mistake with the sender. Therefore, to be careful, Klein didn't leave his name. After he folded the letter, he looked at his 3-meter-tall ceiling. He picked up the copper whistle from the bed a little hesitantly. Perfect, let it squat and get the letter. Klein emphasized inwardly before lifting his right hand and putting the copper whistle to his lips. He puffed up his cheeks and blew hard. The whistle didn't produce a sound, but Klein's acute senses noticed that the surroundings had instantly turned cold. He activated his spirit vision and saw that there were blurry yet glistening white bones surging out of his study desk like a fountain as it rose in height. The white bones quickly gathered together and turned into an illusory yet huge monster. Its head tore through the wall of spirituality and reached somewhere unknown. Klein looked at the white skeleton's thighs and body, as well as its arm that hung down. Seeing its right palm open up, the corner of Klein's lips twitched as he tossed over the folded letter. The large bony palm did a sweep and caught the letter firmly. Then, Klein picked up his copper whistle and blew again without hesitation. The monster crumbled in an instant, transforming into bones that fell onto his desk before sinking in and vanishing. After doing all of that, Klein removed the wall of spirituality. In the sudden wind that stirred, he hobbled towards the clothes rack and returned the copper whistle to its original place. Then, he quickly walked to his bed and planted his head into it. The moment his body touched the soft mattress, he fell into a deep sleep. Chapter 183, A Lesson on Mediumship. After dinner, Klein engaged in small talk before reclining on the sofa. He picked up the recently delivered Awa Evening News and started leisurely reading. Benson wore a bitter expression as he sat opposite his sister. In front of him was the dining table which had been wiped clean by Bella. On it was grammar books, classic literature, accountancy notes, and other materials. In front of Melissa were her notes and stationery, including but not limited to pens, paper, rulers, compasses, etc. It's like I've been taken some 10 years back. Back then, I was still a student at the church's Sunday school, Benson complained, but he continued to study with his head down. That's not too bad. This scene makes me feel the achievement of being a parent. Klein smiled and said, knowledge can change one's destiny, and diligence will result in glory. I made up the latter half of that saying. I wonder if Roselle has said that before. He lampooned in his heart. The room quickly became quiet except for the sound of pens scratching across pages or of books being flipped. Bella had finished doing the dishes and tidied up the kitchen before returning to her room on the first floor, a small room that was formerly the guest room. Klein sipped on his side black tea as he read the newspaper, occasionally engaging in small talk with his siblings. It was relaxing. Suddenly, the gas lamps in the living room and dining room turned dark at the same time as if they had run out of fuel. Benson and Melissa looked up towards the lamps, in an attempt to figure out the cause. Klein also looked towards the lamps. At this moment, he felt something touch his arm. He was the only living person in the living room, but something had touched his arm. His hair stood on end. Klein retracted his arm and turned to look over. He saw 5 thin, pale fingers growing on the tip of a tongue. Underneath them was an irregular row of sharp teeth. Klein instinctively reached for his pockets. Within them were the requiem charms and slumber charms. But he caught a glimpse of a neatly folded piece of paper in the finger's grasp. A letter. A messenger. Klein heaved a sigh of relief. At that moment, the 5 pale fingers prodded his arm again. Klein saw Melissa about to stand up and check on the gas lamp. He reached out with his left hand and grabbed the letter, then he quickly retracted his arm and hid the letter under the stack of newspapers on the table. He then saw the fingers, tongue, and the irregular row of sharp teeth fade away and disappear from the corner of his eyes. With a thought, Klein tapped his left molar and silently activated his spirit vision. He once again saw the 5 abnormally thin fingers. He saw the long red tongue adorned with sharp, white teeth. He saw them retracting back into the transparent face on the ground. A second later, the face disappeared completely. The lights in the living room and dining room were restored back to normal. Strange, Melissa pouted, finding no faults with the lamps even after a serious check. Why is the lady in our house responsible for such things, while the men watch from the side? Klein shook his head and deactivated his spirit vision. When spirits were willing to be seen and had the corresponding abilities, even an ordinary person could spot them. What happened just now was an example. After discussing the problem with the gas lamps, the Moretti siblings became quiet once again. Benson and Melissa once again delved into the ocean of knowledge. Klein used the newspaper as a cover and unfolded the letter with one hand. He placed the paper between the newspapers and started reading the reply from Spirit Guide Daily. I have to emphasize again, I prefer the title of Spirit Medium. I'm going to give you a positive response regarding what you asked. Yes, mediumship rituals can also be used on living beings, not just living humans. But this is troublesome and poses some level of danger. The souls left behind by the dead are pure. They have few impurities or chaotic thoughts. We can communicate with them, asking them questions and receiving answers without any barriers. Of course, you can use the method of dream divination to directly receive images from them. But that cannot be replicated with living humans. The subject still has a will and would fight against unprotected communication between souls. Klein's lips twitched when he read the letter. He confirmed that it was Daly herself who wrote this letter. Unprotected communication. That really is the way she speaks. Klein returned to the letter after taking a quick glance at his siblings. We only have 2 methods when faced with such a situation. First, we can use our powerful spirituality and sophisticated mediumship rituals to triumph over the will of the other person, engaging in a barbaric method of communication. Second, we can use medication to make the other party relax. What I use the most are the Amantha essence and eye of the spirit medication. I'm sure that you still have a lingering impression of those. After reaching the stage of channeling the soul, you must take note that you're also in a spiritual state, unlike when you're communicating with the souls left behind by the dead. In simpler terms, your spirituality is entering the spirituality world of the other party. Take note, a professional spirit medium wouldn't lack the means of protecting themselves under such a state. But you cannot do that. You would not be able to learn or use the techniques that I know of even if I explained them to you. So you have to maintain a certain level of lucidity and rational thought. Only through this method can you fight back against the torrents of the other party's random and chaotic thoughts before arriving before his spirit and establishing communication. At this point, you'll be communicating at the level of the body of heart and mind. At this stage, you have 2 options. One is to use a technique to forcefully read the memories of the other party, but you have to be very careful, for you cannot be sure if the things you're reading are the things that you want to know. If you indiscriminately receive a large amount of memories from a person, it's very likely that your soul would collapse. Furthermore, it will cause severe damage to your target's soul, sometimes even destroying them completely. Unless you're a professional spirit medium, I do not suggest using this method. The second option is to gently communicate with the other party's body of heart and mind. No matter how you entered, whether it be through violence or medication, the target will definitely be in a groggy state. They would generally not be able to lie, just like you couldn't. No, you cannot recall what happened to you. Although I know you've definitely forgotten about it. Sorry, Madam Daly, I was very awake back then. Klein chortled inwardly as he lowered his gaze and read the rest of the letter. Such communication can allow you to obtain real answers, but they won't necessarily all be the truth. You should understand what I mean. As long as you read the news, you must have heard Emperor Roselle's famous quote. I don't remember the actual quote, but the essence of the quote is that what one says shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth. In short, a spirit might not remember everything because a lot of memories are in one's subconscious or collectively be in the subconscious. Oh, I shouldn't mention that. Dunn calls it the evil theories of the psychology alchemists. Thus, you must be able to guide the soul and be good at designing your questions, do you understand? The corresponding techniques include. These are all under normal circumstances. What should we pay attention to when we're trying to communicate with the soul of a beyonder who has gone insane? It's the same, maintaining your lucidity. You must not fall into a daze at all. This is because a beyonder's spirituality is very potent and their spirit is filled with chaotic thoughts. Let me give an example. An ordinary person's consciousness is an island. The subconscious is the portion of the sea beneath the island. The collective subconscious is the surrounding sea. The sky belongs to the spirit world. As for a beyonder, his island might have a controllable active volcano. A lunatic's island might have a volcano that can erupt at any time. It would quake the foundations and pollute the sea. When you come into unprotected contact with the spirit of an insane person, his chaotic thoughts might infect you, just like how polluted water in the sea would flow outward, spreading further. Yes, channeling his spirit under such conditions is like linking your sea to his, thus, you need to pay close attention to this pollution. A few examples are when a spirit medium is careless when doing similar things and didn't use any protection. After that, they can develop mental problems similar to that of the target. Under normal circumstances, mental diseases are not contagious. But in the domain of mysticism, in the world of channeling spirits, they can indeed be contagious. Maintaining your lucidity and not being affected by the chaotic thoughts of the target are things that you must pay attention to. Following those would be the guided questions, which can be used to effectively communicate with an insane person. If you wish to try this, I suggest applying a sedative agent before doing so. The corresponding formula is available behind Tinjin City's Chinese Gate. There's also the formulated product. It can be effective in helping you maintain rational thought during the process. Of course, you can also get Dunn to apply for help from the Backlund Diocese. I'm very willing to see the spirituality state of an insane sequence 7 psychiatrist. Lucidity and rational thought. That's my expertise. I maintained lucidity and rational thought even when my soul was being channeled. Of course, I'm not someone who lets confidence get to my head. I'll still apply for the sedative agent, amantha extract, and eye of the spirit medication. Klein heaved a sigh of relief, a little eager to make the attempt. He put down his newspaper and stood up. He then entered the bathroom and ignited the letter with his spirituality before tossing the ashes into the toilet bowl and flushing them. That night, Klein once again tried the ritual for summoning himself and brought the flaring sun charm back to the physical world and into his room. He also didn't receive Mr. Azik's letter even though he had expected a swift reply. Perhaps he needed some time to recall the knowledge, or perhaps, he's not free to give a reply for now. Or perhaps he's worried that he would interrupt my sleep. Klein dispelled the wall of spirituality as he speculated. He made his way to the bed. The following day, Tuesday morning, Klein entered the Blackthorn Security Company and knocked on the door to the captain's office as usual. Chapter 184, Behind the Gate, Please come in, Dunn Smith said with a mellow and pleasant voice. Klein turned the doorknob and pushed open the door to see the captain having his breakfast. In his right hand was a cup of coffee emitting a rich aroma. On the plate in front of him, there was white bread toast and bacon. Dunn placed the remaining sandwich toast with butter into his mouth and ate it. He then silently pointed to the chair opposite his desk. Klein didn't disturb his captain from enjoying his breakfast. With a smile, he sat down as he waited patiently. Dunn saw that he was in no hurry, so he relaxed back into his chair, picked up his coffee to take a sip, and swallowed the food in his mouth. He took a napkin, wiped the corners of his lips and said, "What's the matter?" Klein nodded seriously and said, "I've met Daxter Guderian, the doctor at the asylum and also member of the Psychology Alchemists." As he spoke, he caught a glimpse of the magazine that was spread open before the captain. "Did he provide any news?" Dunn asked, crossing his arms. Klein simply described, "He told me that before Hood Eugen went crazy, there was someone who visited him quite frequently. That person's name is Lenivis." Lenivis, Dunn massaged his temples. "I seem to have heard of it before. He's the cheat who swindled at least 10,000 pounds, Klein reminded him. Dunn thought for a while with a serious look on his face. He then shook his head to show that he had no memory of it. "Captain, you're not sensitive at all when it comes to money." Klein lampooned and told him the related story about Lenivis by highlighting the main points. The cheat falsely claimed that he had prospected and purchased an iron mine with rich deposits of iron ore. He raised funds from private individuals in Tingen and swindled more than 10,000 pounds. Someone I know from the divination club suffered a loss from this. In addition, a young woman was swindled into an engagement with him and is now pregnant with his child. He visited Hood Eugen multiple times before he went crazy, Dunn said in thought. Sequence 8 Beyonder, Swindler. The Marauder Pathway, Captain, your memory is actually good when it comes to this kind of thing. Klein found it funny as he reflected over it. He nodded faintly and said, that was my guess as well. Because the steelworks company that Lenivis set up was in the south and the victims were of several different beliefs, the case wasn't passed to us in the end. Even if there had been evidence of Beyonder involvement in the case, it would have been passed over to the mandated punishers. Dunn finally understood the ins and outs of the story. He looked at Klein with his deep gray eyes and said, "What do you want to do?" "Cough, Captain, can you please not be so sensitive?" Klein replied with a mask of solemnity, "I want to talk to Hood Eugen via a mediumship ritual and figure out why Lenivis came looking for him. I want to know if that visit is directly related to him going insane." Dunn nodded slightly and said, "Even if you hadn't applied to do it, I would have had a similar experiment done when we were certain that Hood Eugen is crazy. However, Daly told me that it's quite risky." "Are you confident?" "I can ask for assistance from the Backlund Diocese. It shouldn't be a problem to delay it for a few days." Klein's main motivation to become a Beyonder was to study mysticism and find a way home. As it was a chance for practical exercise and he was confident enough, he was naturally unwilling to give it up. "Captain, I've mastered knowledge on the subject. I'm confident about this. Of course, I'll require certain ingredients, such as the Amantha extract, eye of the spirit medicine, and sedative agent." Sedative agent, Dunn ruminated over the name and confirmed Klein's professionalism. He remembered Daly mentioned that it was a liquid medicine that was rarely used yet was very efficient in mediumship. Dunn Smith pondered for nearly 20 seconds and leaned back into his chair. He said, "Go ahead and fill out a request form. Then, collect what you need from behind Cheney's gate." I'm not sure if there are any finished goods." "If there aren't any, pick up the ingredients you need and concoct the medicine accordingly." "All right," Klein replied happily. He didn't get up but sat firmly in his chair. Dunn massaged his temples. He thought carefully and said, "It happens to be my turn to monitor the asylum this evening. We can't visit Hood Eugen directly. No one knows if there are members of the Psychology Alchemists disguised as doctors, nurses, janitors, or patients in the asylum. No one knows if the Psychology Alchemists are monitoring Hood Organ either. Any action we take must be secret. We can't expose that Daxter Guderian has become our informant. We'll go at dawn by sneaking in secretly. Yes, I'll keep guard while you perform the ritual to prevent any accidents from happening. That'd be best. If Hood Eugen is just pretending to be crazy, while I use a mediumship ritual on him, it would be like I barged into the zoo and danced before a tiger. Klein relaxed and said sincerely, "Yes, Captain." He stood up and walked towards the door. Just then, the corner of his eyes noticed the title of the magazine article the captain was reading. Donningsman tree sap in the southern continent's rainforests has had a significant effect on boosting hair growth. Klein retracted his gaze, opened the door, and exited the captain's office. Suddenly, there was a playful thought that flashed through his mind. Actually, a Beyonder doesn't need to go through such trouble. If old Neil was still around, he could design a ritualistic magic for hair regrowth. Then, he would pray for the goddess's assistance. Whether one would be covered with hair and become a curly-haired baboon, that's another story. What would the goddess's response be? If it were me, I would definitely curse, "Motherfucker." That thought suddenly tainted Klein's happiness with sadness, but there was also a hint of hilarity in the sadness. He entered the clerk's office and sat before the Ackerson Model 1346 typewriter and finished typing his application. After Dunn Smith stamped and signed the application, he took it down to the basement and walked along the tunnel that was lit up with gas lamps, towards Cheney's Gate. Only at that moment did Klein realize something. It would be the first time that he was going beyond the mysterious gate. I wonder what it looks like. He quickened his pace with anticipation and came before the twin doors of the black gate. He first passed his request to Sikatron, who was on duty that day for registration purposes. Then, Klein took back the document that now had her signature as well. He knocked on Cheney's Gate and sensed how empty and distant the echo was. He didn't hear any footsteps, but within half a minute, the gate with 7 dark sacred emblems opened with a creak. Cheney's Gate opened up to allow a single person's passage before coming to a stop. Klein then walked in with the help of the gas lamps on both sides of the corridor. Behind the gate, there was an elderly man with obvious wrinkles and thinning hair. He was wearing a classic black robe and holding a barn lantern. The dim candlelight shone through the glass, illuminating the elderly man's expressionless face, which was a mixture of light and darkness. His light blue eyes were like ice that had been frozen for 1,000 years. "Document," he said with his husky voice. Klein had seen the elderly man before because at dusk every day, he would come out from behind Cheney's Gate with his partners. They would pass by the duty room and take the hallway leading to St. Selena Cathedral. They were nighthawks who had aged and volunteered to keep guard inside. According to Klein's understanding, there were 5 of them who were keeping watch. "This is my application." He passed the document in his hands to the elderly man before him. The guard with light blue eyes raised the barn lantern and looked through the request carefully. After he made sure that there were no mistakes, he moved aside and let Klein pass. Klein passed through Cheney's Gate slowly. He had yet to take a good look around when he felt an indescribably chill. It wasn't the cold of winter, but a chill that would make a human spirituality shiver. Klein lifted his gaze and looked afar. He saw candlesticks appearing on the wall in succession, and there were silver candles with carvings on them. The flames gave out a blue luster, without any flickering. Creak. The guard closed Cheney's Gate, and the surroundings became extremely quiet. There was a broad walkway before Klein, a walkway paved with ancient stone slabs. On both sides of the walkway were stone doors labeled ingredients, medicine, information, and so on. At the end of the walkway, there was a flight of stairs that connected to the lower floors. It extended into the dark as though it was connected to the abyss. It should be connected to different sealed locations that have sealed artifacts. I heard that there are a few floors. I wonder which floor contains St. Selena's ashes. Klein adapted to the brightness behind the gate and suddenly felt that there was something shapeless scraping against his skin. They were in strips, and every one of them chilled him to the bones. He shivered, and he couldn't help but activate his spirit vision. Then, he looked at the entire area behind Cheney's Gate. It was filled with fine black lines. They were swaying lightly, occasionally clustered together, occasionally extended. They were tightly knitted without any gaps. This is the sealing power behind Cheney's gate? Klein nodded indiscernibly. He reined in his thoughts and followed the guard. They went through a heavy stone door labeled Medicine Room. Very soon, he found the Amantha extract, the Eye of the Spirit medicine, and the sedative agent by following the alphabet labels. He had seen the first two before, but it was his first time picking up the latter one. He saw that a blue fluid rippled in the translucent glass bottle. For some reason, looking at the fluid made him feel as though he had entered a mother's embrace. On the bottle, there was a label. It showed the manufacturing date and the expiration date, which was still some time away. Luckily, it can still be used. Klein took the 3 tiny bottles of medicine and walked back to Cheney's gate with the guard keeping him company. He shook off the feeling of coldness that reached the deepest corner of his soul and the creepy experience of being swept by the black lines. When Cheney's gate closed, he couldn't help but look back. He mumbled to himself, staying in there for a long time would affect both the body and soul, right? It's no wonder the guards have to volunteer. Around dawn, Klein used a special technique to lock his bedroom. He pushed open his oriel window and jumped down. The 2-story height posed no danger to the present him. He landed steadily without faltering at all. The Nighthawk's carriage was already parked opposite, waiting for him. Without any exchange, Klein quickly arrived at Tingen Asylum in the North Borough. Following the captain's instructions, he took a detour to one of the corners without a street lamp where he saw the waiting Dunn Smith. "Let's go in." Dunn nodded faintly. "I've made sure that there's no one around." "All right." Klein quickly got closer. As a clown, entering an asylum, it keeps reminding me of a famous saying, "It's like returning home," he mused to himself. He followed Dunn closely. With the aid of the wall's bumpy surface, they somersaulted into the asylum quickly and agilely without standing balance. Dunn turned around and looked. He nodded slightly to give his approval. The two of them crouched and silently moved through the hospital's small park and activity square. They then entered the 3-story building in the asylum and arrived at the top floor where Hood Eugen's room was. As Hood Eugen had the possibility of becoming violent now that he had gone insane, he had been assigned to a single room. Luckily, the monitoring Nighthawks hadn't wasted their efforts during the surveillance and had made a copy of the room key long ago. Gotcha. The lock clicked lightly, and Dunn entered first. Klein projected his gaze past his figure and saw the person sitting on the bed. Hood Eugen's face was long and skinny. His eye sockets were deeply concave and his blonde hair was disheveled. He was looking at the metal-barred window with his grayish-blue eyes. He was looking at the crimson moon outside. Klein closed the door to the room and chuckled as he casually asked, "Why aren't you sleeping?" Dunn was taken aback and suddenly remembered that Klein was now a Sequence 8 clown. Hence, he remained silent and backed off to a corner of the room. Hood Eugen turned his head and looked at Klein. He chuckled foolishly and replied, "I'm waiting for my cake." Chapter 185, Spiritual World Waiting for Cake. That really wasn't an answer that I was expecting. Of course, if I was able to anticipate the answer of a mental patient, wouldn't that mean that I was almost there myself? The thought flashed through Klein's mind. He maintained his relaxed smile as if he was chatting with a friend. "Who's going to send you a cake?" Hood Eugen's expression fell instantly, his face long and depressed. "No, there's no cake. There's no cake. You stole my cake." His voice suddenly became shrill as he glared angrily at Klein. Without waiting for Klein to speak, he let out a shout and opened his mouth, revealing 2 rows of white teeth. Following which, he leaped from his mattress while salivating. He closed in on Klein with one step and extended his hands, attempting to grab onto Klein's shoulders. He wanted to drag Klein towards him and bite him. Despite the sudden attack, Klein reacted quickly despite appearing a little flustered. He instantly bent his knee and squatted. At the same time, he tilted his body to the side and raised his left arm. Oof! His shoulder slammed into Hood Eugen's abdomen, causing Hood's eyes to turn white and drool to drip from his mouth. But Hood Eugen didn't stop moving. He allowed the momentum to carry him down as he opened his arms in an attempt to pull Klein into a bear hug. Klein tilted his body to the side and rolled over. His movements were smooth as though he had practiced them hundreds of times. He pushed against the ground with his right hand and stood up with a somersault. He decided to go on the offensive and charged forward to restrain his opponent. But at that moment, Hood Eugen only stood there blankly, his eyes losing focus, becoming vacant and lost. Klein froze for a moment. He turned his head towards the corner of the room, only to see Dunn Smith, wearing a black windbreaker and matching hat, with his hands clasped tightly together and looking down. The captain has dragged Hood Eugen into a dream. Upon realizing this, he stopped his subsequent attack and took the opportunity to take out the silver ritual dagger that couldn't harm anyone. He used it to create a wall of spirituality which sealed the ward. Klein then took out 3 candles infused with mint and placed them on the window in a triangular formation. One candle signified the Evernight goddess, another the mother of the secrets, and the last represented himself. Soon after, he set up a simple altar and used his spirituality to ignite the candles. Just as he was about to warn the captain, Dunn raised his head and smiled. Hood Eugen's dreams are a sea of chaos. There's no way to guide it. Just as he finished his sentence, a luster returned to Hood Eugen's eyes. It was no longer vacant. Then, the insane psychiatrist moved his waist, letting out a comfortable yawn. Klein was momentarily at a loss, so he remained quiet. He picked up a metal bottle containing the amantha extract. He dripped the transparent liquid extracted from the night vanilla, slumber flower, and chamomile into the flames of the candle representing himself, allowing the serene aroma to spread around the room. Hood Eugen's nervousness, anger, and relief completely vanished. He languidly sat down again on the edge of his bed and looked out at the crimson moon outside the window in a daze. His eyes once again lost their focus as peace was restored. Klein also felt the peace that came with the night. He set the amantha extract down and sat beside Hood Eugen. He wanted to find something to break down Hood's last line of defense. Only with the removal of the last line of defense could he use the eye of the spirit medication to make Hood Eugen's soul slip into a turbid state. After all, I'm not a professional spirit medium. He had already thought of an idea before coming. He fished out a set of tarot cards from his pocket. This set of cards only had the 22 major arcana, so it was easy to carry around. It was a weapon that Klein had successfully applied for. Each of the cards was lined with metal threads made from pure silver. Each of them was able to kill undead beings. Their patterns were complicated and gorgeous, making Klein feel like they were a collector's item and not used against enemies. Klein cut the deck with one hand and smiled at Hood Eugen. Let's play some card games. Cards. Hood Eugen retracted his gaze from outside the window as he repeated the term in a daze. Klein didn't answer, placing the deck of tarot cards into Hood's palm with a sincerity that could not be rejected. Hood Eugen mimicked Klein's actions, trying his hardest to cut the deck with one hand to some success. The attention of the mental patient was slowly drawn to the hard yet flexible, beautifully textured cards in his hand. He flipped over the first card. It was the picture of a man in tattered clothes with his hands tied. He was hanging by his leg with a faint halo at his head. The Hanged Man. Klein nodded in thought. He took the opportunity to grab the eye of the spirit medicine, dripping the amber liquid onto the candle flame, still the one representing himself. An alcoholic fragrance spread forth, inducing an intoxicated feeling to anyone who took a whiff of it. Hood Eugen spaced out bit by bit, his vision losing its focus. The deck of tarot cards in his hand fell onto the bed. But he remained sitting upright, without slumping over. Klein used cogitation to fight back against the medicine's dreamy effects of turning lightheaded and ethereal. He took out another metal bottle from his pocket and twisted the cap open before pouring the blue liquid into his mouth. Sedative agent. The ice-cold liquid flowed through his throat, down his gullet, and into his stomach. Klein instantly felt unusually awake, without any sense of drowsiness. He slowly exhaled, then familiarly took out the other essential oil extracts and herb powders, dripping them onto the 2 candles signifying the Evernight goddess. In the faint fog, he took 2 steps back and solemnly murmured in Hermes, "I pray for the power of the dark night. I pray for the power of the mystery. I pray for the goddess's loving grace. I pray that you would allow me to communicate with the spirituality of the Beyonder beside me, Hudyujin." The incantations reverberated around the room, and Klein saw the flames of the candle, now dyed black, spread outward. He didn't avoid them, nor did he guard against them. He allowed the dark night to envelop him. In this unusually lucid state, he felt his spirit leave the protection of his body and enter a space akin to deep space. All around him was boundless, silent darkness. The sky above him was filled with countless indescribable, transparent figures. There were also streaks of different colors, lustrous splendors that harbored infinite knowledge. The spiritual world. Klein was no longer a stranger to this. Just as he had this thought, a foggy world appeared before him. It was a world enveloped by a faint tornado of light. Klein knew that it represented Hudyujin's spirit that represented his body of heart and mind. Thus, he leaned over, digging into the wall that was the tornado. In an instant, he saw countless specks of light pelting him. He heard the voices of thousands of people discussing something in whispers. These murmurings were very chaotic and lacked any sense of logic. Some included praises for the elegance of some lady, then it turned into a description of the feeling of relief after using the toilet. Some started as a weep, then turned into frenzied joy. The insane thoughts latched on and gnawed at Klein's spirit in a bid to assimilate him. But Klein maintained his lucidity and rationality, quickly flying towards Hudyujin's spiritual world. "This is like a pleasant concert compared to the horrifying murmurings and howls I hear when entering the world above the gray fog." Klein smiled secretly and made his way through the tornado. He saw a groggy, translucent Hudyujin. This Sequence 7 psychiatrist maintained the same state as he was in the outside world. He looked over with a dazed expression. Klein stopped before him and asked softly, "Do you know Lenivis?" Hudyujin replied blankly, "Yes." The light around them underwent a transformation as if Hudyujin was revealing his spiritual sea. Quickly, the intertwining light revealed a bespectacled average-looking man who wore a sarcastic smile. It was the same Lenivis whom Klein had seen in the arrest warrants. Klein nodded in satisfaction and collected himself. He asked a guided question, "Why did Lenivis look for you?" He said. Hudyujin's voice slowly turned soft. Suddenly, he changed into a more charismatic voice and laughed a little maniacally. "Hudyujin, this is the worst era, but also the best era. As long as you seize the opportunity, we can become the rulers of this world, we can become true immortals. As long as you're willing to help, I'll not only tell you the way to master your potion and avoid losing control, I'll also promise that you'll receive godhood qualities in the future, immortal godhood qualities. You should be able to see the presence behind me. My promise is his promise." In some sense, the psychology alchemists are connected to him. Do not doubt. The psychology alchemists aren't strong enough at the moment. It is unable to provide you with enough help unless you're willing to stay at this level for the rest of your life. The method to grasp your potion without losing control. Why does this sound like how I entice others with the acting method? Lenivis sure has lofty ambitions. He's only a Sequence 8, yet he's already talking about manipulating godhood qualities. Just what hidden presence is backing him? This guy seems to be plotting something, which isn't solely just to cheat people out of their money. Or could running scams just be his hobby? Klein had many thoughts as he listened on. When Hudyujin stopped talking, he quickly pressed on. "What kind of assistance did Lenivis want you to provide?" Hudyujin didn't answer immediately, his spiritual world turned silent. He then broke out into laughter. He replied erratically, "Help. Help. Help. Ha ha ha, I provided help. I provided help. I made." His words came to an abrupt halt as his blurry soul contorted. The light and darkness of the surroundings which represented the spiritual sea quickly turned incorporeal, forming a sinister, scary, dark altar. On top of the altar was a cross. There seemed to be something hanging on the cross, as well as things that appeared indiscernible piled at the bottom. The light and darkness alternated, and as the hanging item was about to become clearer, the entire spiritual world shook, as if it was experiencing a magnitude 10 earthquake. Holy shit! Klein had a premonition that something dangerous was about to happen. Without thinking, he turned and flew towards the chaotic tornado of thoughts in an attempt to escape. Chapter 186. The handsome captain. Countless rays of brilliance drowned Klein as ravings of a million people filled his ears. However, Klein thought nothing of it. His abilities as a clown told him that his spirit was being engulfed by a black shadow that was rapidly expanding. The black shadow was a huge cross, and there seemed to be a person hanging upside down on it. Gotcha! The chaotic tornado of thoughts unleashed its load outwards and turned uniform. Slowly, Eugen's spiritual world disintegrated. Klein noticed that he had exceeded his fastest flying speed from his previous trial. His soul had become significantly stronger after he briefly mixed with some of the strength from the mysterious space above the gray fog. Just as the cross's shadow was about to engulf him entirely, he dashed out of the blurry world and felt his body. He familiarly stimulated a descent, and Eugen's long skinny face and messy blonde hair instantly appeared in his vision, along with the 3 candles that were burning at the window ledge. He had managed to get out of the mediumship state in time. In that instant, he saw black scales growing one after another on Eugen's face. His vacant pupils turned into slits, becoming extremely cool and ruthless. Oh shit! He's going to lose control. Klein's pupils constricted, and before he could react, he saw a figure in a knee-length black windbreaker and silk top hat take 2 huge strides before Eugen. He then raised the revolver and pushed it against the man's head. Bang! 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 Dunn Smith fired 5 bullets consecutively. Eugen's head suddenly blew up like a watermelon falling down from a high height. The red and white rainstorm splattered across each and every corner of the room. He had taken care of Eugen before he lost control completely. Klein, who was 50 centimeters away, was covered in blood and dirt. He looked at Dunn Smith in a daze, only having the feeling that the captain was very handsome at that moment. As long as you ignore his memory problems, the captain is very trustworthy. He complimented sincerely from the bottom of his heart. Did an accident happen? Dunn put away his revolver and watched Eugen's mostly headless body slowly fall to the floor. Just as Klein was about to organize his words, he saw that the body had become a pile of bloody flesh within a few seconds, and the asylum uniform that covered it appeared to have its most basic structure damaged. Eugen's corpse was left with very few complete items. There were dozens of scales twinkling with a black shimmer, and his heart that had turned crystalline and faint blue. The heart had a magical luster, like a diamond refracting incoming light. It could calm someone down or make them restless. It could create tension or develop chaos. But other than that, there was nothing notable. This item should be controllable. After Dunn holstered his revolver, he took out a black glove and wore it on his right hand. He then squatted down to pick up the crystalline heart. A controllable item. According to what the captain previously mentioned, it could be used as the main ingredient for the formula of a Sequence 7 psychiatrist. But, would it lead to the advanced Beyonder losing control even more easily? Klein took out his handkerchief to wipe the blood from his face and body. He then picked up his specially made tarot cards and cleaned their surfaces. He looked at the ground and asked curiously, what kind of items would these black scales be considered as? These are ingredients that are contaminated with Beyonder power. They could be made into items that have long-lasting effects. For example, our demon-hunting bullet's ability to injure dead spirits or monsters would decrease drastically as soon as they passed the 3 months mark, leaving only a tiny portion of demon-hunting characteristics in the remnant materials. If the materials used were something like the black scales, the effective period would be as long as a year or two, and the effects would be even better. Of course, due to their characteristics, the black scales are obviously not suitable to be made into demon-hunting bullets, Dunn explained as he took a piece of paper from Klein to wrap the blue heart and black scales. It's just like the materials we use as supplementary ingredients for the potions? Klein asked. Dunn stood back up and nodded slightly. Yes. Someone who loses control will really become a monster. Klein sighed. He seized the opportunity while the room was still sealed with a wall of spirituality and quickly described his encounter in Eugen's mind. When I was communicating with Hood Eugen's spirit, I saw a figure like the true creator in his mind. But it was different from the mainstream ones. It wasn't the chain-bound hanged giant, nor was it the eye behind the shadow curtains. Instead, it was similar to the one you saw in Honas Vincent's dream. Honas Vincent was a member of the Aurora Order. As Melissa's friend, Celine, had peeked at his incantations and completed the magic mirror divination, it led to the Nighthawk's investigation of him. Dunn Smith saw something close to the true creator in his dream, but it was a different image than the mainstream image that was widely circulated. In the end, the result was an injury and a strange death. When Hood Eugen flipped over the tarot card of the Hanged Man, Klein had actually already expected it. But he never thought it would be presented in such a way. Of course, it was only indirect contact. It wouldn't be comparable to the time he had spied on the eternal blazing sun directly. The worst outcome was just mild injury or mild corruption. As he listened to Klein's description, Dunn's expression became solemn. He knitted his eyebrows and said with a deep voice, "A huge cross, black nails, a naked man covered in blood hanging upside down? I didn't see it clearly. That's also the reason why I'm not injured. I only noticed a huge cross and figure similar to a man being hung upside down," Klein replied tactfully. At that moment, all he cared about was fleeing. Seemingly in thought, Dunn nodded and said, "Lenivas's visit to Hood Eugen was related to the true creator? So the Aurora Order is involved?" Klein quickly repeated the conversation he'd had during the communication. Lenivas tempted Hood Eugen with the acting method and a so-called immortal godhood. But I don't understand why he said that it was the worst of times, and also the best of times. Perhaps it was just the way he speaks as a swindler. The help Hood Eugen provided involved a sinister and dark altar. I suspect that Lenivas is plotting something terrifying. Then, his heart stirred as he spoke. "Captain, do you remember the letter written to Mr. Z? The letter that the member from the Aurora Order whom I killed carried. He mentioned in the letter that he was waiting for an appropriate opportunity, something about the arrival of the end of days. He will offer all the lambs in Tingen to his so-called god. Would this be related to Lenivas's plot? Could Lenivas be the Mr. Z from the Aurora Order?" Dunn Smith thought carefully and said, "I don't think so. Lenivas couldn't be Mr. Z, otherwise, he wouldn't be setting up a fake steelworks company to scam people while the Aurora Order was up to something. It would introduce too many variables in his main mission. If anything went wrong with the scam, he would draw the attention of the police and us. He would have to run away from Tingen and abandon his plan. Of course, if he was just insane, it would be perfectly normal for him to act illogically. But judging from the scam he set up, the calmness and cunningness with which he swept away the money doesn't make him look like a real lunatic. So, I don't think he's Mr. Z from the Aurora Order. Of course, he might really be involved in the matter as mentioned in the letter. The one offering all the lambs in Tingen to the so-called god." Upon saying that, Dunn paused, then paced back and forth as he said, "This incident might have quite severe repercussions. We have to reinvestigate Lenivas and get some clues. Let's clean up the scene and cover up any evidence here. Let everyone know that Hood Eugen died but leave no clue as to who killed him. This should lead to action by the psychology alchemists or other beyonders that are paying attention to the asylum. They might know something. The Lenivas scam is either still in the hands of the police department or transferred to the mandated punishers. We'll join the investigations by saying that we obtained clues while investigating the Aurora Order. Then, we'll work together with the mandated punishers and the machinery hive mind. We'll concentrate the forces in Tianjin and investigate everything and anyone associated with Lenivis. We can request assistance from Baklun Diocese and the Holy Cathedral if it's necessary. After that, Dunn turned his head sideways to look at Klein. He ruminated and said, "Do you have anything that you'd like to add?" "Captain, you basically said it all." Klein shook his head solemnly. "No." He hurriedly used ritualistic magic to remove some of the necessary traces with the aid of the simple altar that he had yet to clear in order to ensure that no one would be able to tell that they were the ones who killed Hood Eugen. Then, he put away his ingredients, blew out the candles, removed the wall of spirituality, and left the ward in silence with Dunn Smith. They left the asylum by climbing over its walls. "Go back and rest." Dunn stood at a corner without a street lamp. He pressed his black silk hat and said, "There are many things that can only be done tomorrow." "All right." Klein wasn't a sleepless who only slept 2 to 3 hours a day. He immediately bade farewell to the captain and took the Nighthawk's dedicated carriage that was waiting nearby and returned to Daffodil Street. Before he entered the carriage, he turned back to take a glance. He saw the captain still standing in the dark which even the moonlight couldn't touch. He appeared to be thinking in silence. The streets were quiet and void of people before dawn. The carriage tore through the streets, sometimes going straight, sometimes taking turns. Klein was pondering about Lenivis when suddenly, he felt as if he was in a trance. He saw that the color before his eyes became saturated. The reds became redder and the blacks became blacker, just like an impressionist's oil painting. The surroundings slowed down, and the carriage seemed to enter a strange world. Klein grabbed his flaring sun charm and drew his revolver. Just then, a huge, white, bony palm extended through the carriage window and threw in a neatly folded letter. Then, the palm pulled back and vanished. The oil painting-like scene suddenly returned to normal while the carriage was still driving along the street steadily. It's a really well-hidden method. Klein looked at the letter, by the side of his foot, as the corner of his lips twitched. Chapter 187. Azik's warning. The actions of the messenger shocked Klein for a full 5 seconds before he recovered. He bent over and picked up the letter. Even if Mr. Azik is unable to use a good portion of his abilities as a Beyonder, because of his memory loss, being able to send out such a messenger should make him powerful enough to deal with a sequence 7 or 6 Beyonder. His heart reflected his shocked and envious expression. He didn't unfold the letter immediately. Instead, he placed the letter into his pocket, together with the slumber charms. The carriage continued forward. When Klein exited the carriage at Daffodil Street, he instinctively looked at the driver, Cesare, only to see his relaxed smile, as if he hadn't noticed anything unusual that had happened. Klein nodded and returned home after observing Cesare with his spirit vision. He looked at the balcony and pipes on the second floor and pondered for a few seconds. He decided to maintain his gentlemanly behavior and not attempt to scale the pipe back into his room. As for his stained clothes, he would take them to the Blackthorn Security Company tomorrow and get a professional to wash them through the police department. That would prevent his clothes from shocking his maid Bella and his sister Melissa. Klein had removed the reverse lock on the front door before he leaped out the window from the second floor. Now, he took advantage of the fact that it was late at night and quietly opened the door to his house, deftly making his way in. After closing and locking the main door, he heaved a sigh of relief. He went up to the second floor with hushed footsteps. Stopping before his locked bedroom, Klein took out a tarot card calmly. He inserted it into the slit of the door and lightly pulled, easily breaking the specialized lock he designed himself. He then entered the room, locked the door, and removed his clothes, before he fully relaxed. "It sure feels like being a thief." Klein laughed as he shook his head. He calmly took out his revolver and placed it under the pillow. After he was finished with all of that, he lit up the gas lamp and sat in front of his desk. He took out the letter and began reading seriously. "I'm sorry for replying only now. I've been busy searching for traces of my past. I've also been meeting up with former teachers and students, and those drag on late into the night. I finally understand the encounters that I've had over the past 2 days after reading your letter. The police searched every room in the hotel that I'm staying at. There was a person who secretly snooped around in the hotel at night. Yes, I'm talking about a person with beyonder powers. So Rear Admiral Hurricane Kalangos, who's a frequent character in novels and newspapers, has infiltrated Backland and has gone on quite a killing spree. I remember that he's not only wanted by the Lone Kingdom, he's also on the bounty list of the Faysak Empire, the Indus Republic, the Fainapotter Kingdom. So, how much is the bounty? Klein subconsciously wondered. He didn't get an answer because Azik had switched to mentioning something else. I find the abilities of a shepherd that you described quite familiar. It's as if I've seen it somewhere, but I cannot remember where. It must be an encounter from one of my past lives. Not being able to recall it makes me very frustrated. Mr. Azik is a little interested in the shepherd. I can use this to get him to help me. Yes, this sure is coincidental. No, this is not a coincidence, but inevitable. It can be inferred that Mr. Azik has lived for over 1,000 years and is most likely a high-sequence beyonder. Then, he would most likely have encountered the powers of many different beyonders in his earlier lives. He would also have deeper impressions of those that were more unique. In other words, it isn't only the shepherd that would give him feelings of familiarity, but jobs such as the unshadowed, demon hunter, or guardian that would do so as well. It's highly likely that Mr. Azik would find any mystical item that corresponds to a particular sequence's abilities familiar and have his interest piqued. That's something that can be imagined. Klein was doubtful at first before being enlightened. He was a lot more certain as a result. He shifted his gaze and continued to read the letter. I've long recalled some parts of the sacrificial ritual you asked about, probably because I have a deeper impression of them. Perhaps I was a priest in one of my more recent lifetimes. I have to remind you and warn you that you have to be very cautious when using sacrificial rituals. You cannot entrust your safety to evil gods or hidden, mysterious existences. They do not have consciences like we do. Also, you have to possess a strong sense of right and wrong, for the evil gods and devils often create seemingly harmless identities for themselves. My opinion is that you cannot sacrifice something whose presence you are not fully aware of, otherwise, your soul could end up being the sacrificial item. In simple terms, evil gods and devils will take on another form, disguising themselves as someone trustworthy. Just like on the internet, an account that claims to be a seemingly adorable chick might be controlled by a huge bloke. He had to be cautious even if they were to meet offline after confirming the person's looks, as the person might just be crossdresser. Klein didn't disregard Azik's warning just because he was conducting the sacrificial ritual for himself. He nodded in approval. After Azik emphasized a few things he had to look out for, he quickly explained the sacrificial ritual he knew of. First, set up the ritual. Choose the symbols based on which deity or unorthodox mysterious existence you are going to offer a sacrifice to. Use the corresponding herbs and minerals of his, or her, domain. Of course, you can also make them into holy oils, ointments, scents, and other items in advance. Symbols? Klein froze for a moment. He realized that he, the fool that didn't belong to this era, didn't know what his corresponding symbol was. He thought for a moment, quickly recalling the complex symbol on the back of his chair at the ancient bronze table. It was made up of a pupil eye which represented secrecy, and the partial contorted lines which represented change. That should be my symbol, or more accurately, that is what symbolizes me in the world above the gray fog. My domain is much simpler than secrecy, change, good luck. But I cannot be too sure of that, so I'll have to try it out. Even if the symbol is wrong, as long as I get my honorary name right, the target of the sacrifice wouldn't point towards some other entity. The worst thing that could happen is that the ritual would fail. Of that, I'm certain. Klein thought as he rubbed the surface of the paper as he formulated a plan in his heart. His eyes focused on the letter once again, reading the rest of the letter. Second, you need to be clear if the sacrifice needs to happen at a specific time. Then, follow the processes of a normal ritual, until you finish reciting the honorable names and incantations of the ritual. You must remember to use either Jotun, Dragonese, Elvish, or Ancient Hermes. You must use the natural powers in these languages to establish a direct connection with the corresponding entity. You can design the exact incantations to use, but it must include these critical terms: pray, notice, offer, kingdom, gates, and open. Finally, you must use materials that have a certain spirituality quality to create a connection with the natural powers of the incantation. This will allow you to construct a tunnel that connects to the gates of the kingdom where the corresponding entity resides. If the entity is interested, then your sacrifice is complete. This step isn't absolutely necessary. If you can make the corresponding entity very interested in your sacrifice, then he will open the gates to his kingdom for you after you finish reciting the incantations, establishing a stable tunnel on his own accord. Of course, this would often imply danger, as the orthodox result, as relatively friendly hidden gods rarely do this. Only evil gods or devils would reply to you directly in order to achieve their goals. Materials that have spirituality are not cheap. I wondered if merely reciting the incantations would allow me to open a sacrificial tunnel similar to the door of summoning. I wonder if I could make use of the abilities of the world above the gray fog. Yes, I'll try that first and only get the materials with spirituality from the underground market if I fail. Do I need Beyonder ingredients? It should be fine if it possesses a certain amount of spirituality, right? Klein thought about the 300 pounds lying around in his anonymous account. He also thought about the 10+ pounds of savings that he had saved up. Beyonder materials were not completely identical to materials that possessed spirituality. For example, the heart that Hood Eugen left behind was a Beyonder ingredient, while the black scales were a material possessing certain amounts of spirituality. After he finished reading Mr. Azik's letter, Klein rubbed his fingers together and ignited a flame of spirituality. He burned the paper to ash and threw it into the rubbish bin. It was already deep into the night and Klein was in no hurry to try the ritual. He intended to first make a plan and go through everything that he needed to take note of before putting it into practice. He had a vague understanding of his shortcomings long ago. He was cautious and rational when it came to things he made plans for, but once the events deviated from his original plans, he would easily consider only the good and disregard the bad when he was forced to be on his toes. A simpler description would be that a rash action of his would easily cause him to court death. Klein extended his palm to cover his face. The next day, Dunn Smith, who had communicated with the mandated punishers and machinery hive mind, started to assign missions. Klein also received his assignment. He was tasked to investigate a number of people who had connections to Lenivis. But because of his suggestion and the policy of the Nighthawks, he didn't have to be responsible for the people he had met previously. Of course, Klein continued with his combat lessons in the afternoon. Nor did Dunn assign him the role of lead investigator. Backlund, Hilston Backlund. In a building with a horse stable and garden. Kalangos, who had a unique wide chin and dark green eyes, looked at the unconscious man before him. He took off the man's clothes and wore them. He then leisurely walked in front of the dressing mirror and saw the black glove on his left hand twitch. He saw many contorted lines appearing on its back. A few seconds later, Kalangos saw a thin veil of light envelop his figure. His muscles, skin, and bones began undergoing a strange transformation. Sometime later, he transformed into the unconscious man, completely identical in height, appearance, and demeanor. Chapter 188, Ball-sharp nose, thin eyebrows, slightly droopy cheeks, faint blue eyes. Kalangos examined himself in the mirror. He was certain that he looked no different from the unconscious man. After he rehearsed a few of the man's gestures, he bent down to drag the man off the ground and shoved him into a wardrobe. Then, he extended his right hand. With an audible snap, he broke the man's neck. Kalangos took out his handkerchief and wiped his hands before closing the wardrobe door. He slowly walked back to the mirror, wore a black double-breasted suit, tied a bow tie, and raised a bottle of amber-colored cologne. He dripped a few drops on his wrist, then dabbed them over himself. Kalangos tidied his hair in front of the mirror, then walked out of the room. He clasped his hands and told his butler who was waiting outside, "Don't let anyone enter my room, I'm keeping something very important in there." "Yes, Baron." The balding butler pressed his hand against his chest and bowed. Your carriage and personal servant is waiting downstairs. Duke Megan's invitation card is there as well. Maintaining the Baron's mannerisms, Kalangos nodded indiscernibly. He walked towards the stairs in an arrogant manner under the company of his butler. A Baron who is riddled in debt, to the point of not wanting to hire a normal security guard, has actually maintained his hiring of a butler, personal male servant, 2 attendants, 2 first-grade maidservants, 4 second-grade maidservants, 2 laundry female workers, 1 carriage driver, 1 stable master, 1 gardener, 1 chef, and 1 sous chef. To these foolish nobles, dignity really is everything. I even had to waste some of my time to learn the strange pronunciations and so-called noble slang. Kalangos thought to himself in disdain. Backlund, Sherwood Backlund. In a particular cramped apartment. Zio Dericha sat cross-legged on a bed and looked at Fur's wall, who was reading a novel with the light from the window. This is so disappointing. Kalangos didn't leave any clues behind. We still haven't figured out what he's trying to do in Backlund. They had acted according to their initial plan and lodged a police report. Then, they secretly sent a letter to the local police station and described the strange situation at the crime scene in detail. They also mentioned that the suspect could be Kalangos. The police station responded as they had predicted. The policemen were very careful, and they transferred the case directly to the mandated punishers. After a day's time, the news that Rear Admiral Hurricane had sneaked into Backlund was widely spread among all enforcement teams. Zio and Furs also left the place they originally rented and hid to investigate in secret. They didn't want to be brought back to the police station to help with the official investigation. The mandated punishers, Nighthawks, and Machinery Hive Mind were all hostile towards non-official Beyonders. The churches viewed them as potential criminals. Hence, not only were Zio and Furs avoiding the possibility of Kalangos' pursuit, but they were also hiding from the enforcement authorities. If we could discover his purpose so easily, Kalangos would have been buried in a cemetery long ago, and the tombstone would be covered in weeds, Furs replied casually. We need to wait patiently. As long as the authorities continue to take this much interest in him, Kalangos will definitely make a mistake. I've got to say, I'm quite envious of a mystical item that can allow one to change appearances. Zio hugged her knees and looked out the window. I'm just worried that Kalangos will take action soon and then flee from Backlund before anyone can respond. If that happens, I don't know when I'll be able to advance to Sequence 8, let alone Sequence 6 or Sequence 5. She paused and muttered as her mind spaced out. I don't know when I'll be able to take back the things that belong to our family. It's been almost a year since I last saw my younger brother. Furs gave her a comforting smile. When you fulfill your wishes, please allow me to write your experiences into a story. It would definitely be an interesting and exciting one. I actually find Miss Audrey very generous. Even if Kalangos escapes, I think she'll still reward us handsomely. We've been busying ourselves for so long after all, and we've even caused Kalangos to appear. I hope so. Sigh, why can't I have any fortuitous encounters? Zio grabbed her shoulder-length blonde hair. Furs frowned and said, in the Beyonder world, fortuitous encounters are usually accompanied with danger. I have yet to figure out what the ravings we hear during the full moon mean, or if they will result in negative changes. Fortuitous encounters without dangers may exist, but they are very, very rare. It's difficult for your wish to be fulfilled, unless we receive the favors from an orthodox deity or the attention of some friendly hidden existence. However, it would be hard for us to tell if it was really an evil god or devil in disguise. Zio sat straight and drew a crimson moon on her chest. May the goddess watch over me. Duke Negan was in his mansion located in Backlund, Empress Borough, where he was hosting a grand ball. There were 2 parts of the mansion. One was the dancing hall located on the ground floor, which was covered with glamorous stone slabs carved with complicated patterns. There was the Duke's excellent ensemble playing music in a corner. Up the stairs, there was a winding corridor that circled the hall located on the 2nd floor. The guests were holding their glasses, leaning against the railing, overlooking the people dancing on the ground floor as though they were enjoying a fencing match from the stands. Occasionally, a gentleman would walk before a lady or his wife to invite them to dance. If the invitation was accepted, both of them would walk down the stairs hand in hand and enter the hall. On the far side of the corridor, there were doors after doors. They were rooms that had been allocated to the guests as their resting quarters. But behind a French door was a corridor, and on both sides of the corridor were various gypsum statues. They were all the ancestors of the Negan family. At the end of the corridor was another hall which could see the ball. Long tables were covered with a variety of delicious food and fine wine, and another ensemble belonging to the Duke was playing relaxing melodies for the guests. In the hall, the guests were gathering in groups. Some were seated and some stood around, chatting about all kinds of matters. Those who wished to get away from the frivolities for a while would go to the attached balconies to overlook the garden and enjoy the crimson moon in the sky. After participating in the opening dance, Audrey Hall stood on the second floor above the dancing hall and stared at the candles on the huge crystal chandeliers hanging from the rooftop in a daze. However, she noticed that many young men were appearing to pump themselves up to come over and invite her for a dance. So, she wisely left the place and went to the corridor that connected to the dining hall. How boring, but my attendance is necessary. Sigh, can't they just let me observe in silence? I have to say, some people have rich facial expressions when they dance. They remind me of animals seeking mates. Audrey lowered her head, looked at the tips of her feet, and walked in a straight line out of boredom. Just then, the corner of her eyes caught an approaching figure. She slowed down, stood straight, and instantly became the elegant yet quiet Miss Hall. "Good day, Baron Grammer," Audrey greeted with a flawless smile and etiquette. Baron Grammer had thin eyebrows and faint blue eyes. He smiled and bowed. "Nice to meet you again, Miss Hall. You are the brightest and most dazzling gemstone at this ball." After exchanging a few words, Baron Grammer headed for the dancing hall while Audrey continued approaching the dining hall. After a few steps, she suddenly frowned. There was puzzlement in her green eyes. Baron Grammer isn't the same as before. In the past, when he sees a pretty lady or madam of a higher rank than he is, and one that's relatively prettier, he would look to the side without looking at them directly. Then, he would steal glances constantly. But today, he appears very confident. Also, his cologne smells off. In the numerous parties in the past, his body would emit the final note of the amber cologne fragrance, musky yet faint, not ostentatious yet elegant. In other words, he would spray the cologne a few hours earlier to let the front and middle notes disperse before the gathering. But just now, his cologne was amber in middle note, rich and refined. Audrey slowed down her footsteps. As a spectator who had completely digested her potion, her sensitivity towards details wasn't anything other Beyonders could compare to. Suddenly, she thought of a possibility. Her green crystal-clear eyes froze. It couldn't be Kalengos in a disguise, right? The creeping hunger has the power to change a person's appearance. The more Audrey thought about it, the more possible it seemed. She felt uptight as she turned nervous and panicky. If he really was Rear Admiral Hurricane, what is he trying to do? It's a pity that I can't bring Susie to the ball. Otherwise, I could ask her to observe Baron Grammer. No way, I have to warn Father. Amidst her frantic thoughts, Audrey quickened her pace and entered the dining hall. She found Count Hall, who was talking to the Chief Cabinet Secretary and others. She flashed a flawless smile and walked over. She held Count Hall by his arm and told the others, "Gentlemen, do you mind if I borrow Count Hall for a few minutes?" "Beautiful lady, it's your right," the few gentlemen said in a friendly response. Audrey held Count Hall by his arm and moved to the nearest balcony. They found a quiet, uninhabited corner, and she said to her middle-aged father, who was getting plump, "Father, I have something to tell you." Count Hall was smiling fondly at his daughter, but he got serious when he saw her serious facial expression. "What's the matter?" "I ran into Baron Grammer earlier, but there are things about him that are different from the past. For instance, his cologne was in the middle note of the amber fragrance." It used to be the end note. And Audrey continued with the things that she found different. It could be explained as being sensitive and meticulous. After she described what she had noticed, she weighed her words and added, I heard from Viscount Glaint that Rear Admiral Hurricane Kalangos has the ability to take on other people's appearance. Hasn't he been in Backland recently? Count Hall listened to her carefully, and his face grew abnormally grave. But he soon flashed a smile and comforted his anxious daughter. I'll take care of this. Go look for your mother and stay with her. She's at the lounge in this hall. Okay. Audrey nodded obediently. On the way back to the lounge, she turned around and looked at her father. She saw that Count Hall was talking to another noble softly, and he wore a rather solemn look. Audrey couldn't help but feel anxious. She felt that she needed to do something to make sure that her father, mother, and brother didn't get hurt. She surveyed the area and changed the direction in which she was heading in. She left the dining hall and found Duke Megan's small prayer room. She pushed the door closed and locked it behind her. She looked at the symbol of the Lord of Storms before her and subconsciously found a remote and dark corner. Audrey sat down with her body leaning forward. She clasped her hands together into a praying position and supported her forehead. Then, she recited softly in Hermes, the fool that doesn't belong to this era, you are the mysterious ruler above the gray fog, you are the king of yellow and black who wields good luck. Chapter 189, Prayers and Replies. Tingen City, Daffodil Street. Klein was discussing the latest play with Benson and Melissa and was inviting them to watch it at the theater next weekend. I think the newspapers have said enough about it. The Return of the Count is definitely a play that's worth watching. It's already been performed more than 10 times in Backland, and it's sold out each time. I think that we shouldn't miss this opportunity. Klein, who had lacked sources of entertainment, was unwilling to give up. After all, he had been an ardent follower of television shows back on Earth. Of course, if it wasn't for the maintenance of my image, I'd rather go to a bar and play billiards. Yes, renting a venue for tennis isn't a bad choice. That can be considered as it's a leisure sport for the middle class. With my current fitness, as long as I don't encounter other beyonders, I should be able to handle most opponents easily. Forget it, it can only be a passing thought for now. I still have to reinvestigate the figures associated with Lenivis in the morning, go for combat training in the afternoon, and search for the house with the red chimney in the evening before returning home. I sure am a busy man. Klein tried to remain optimistic. Noticing that Benson was inclined towards his suggestion while Melissa was still a little hesitant, Klein smiled as he added, I heard that the most popular supporting cast in The Return of the Count is a genius mechanic. All right, we do have to see a play at a large theater once in our lives. Melissa pouted and nodded her head grudgingly, but there was now a sparkle in her eyes. Klein was about to respond when he heard a buzzing in his ears. He became dizzy for a few seconds. Someone is praying to me. He supported his back with his right hand and chuckled. Then I shall wait patiently for the tickets to go on sale. All right, I'll be returning to my bedroom to write up a report. We also have to plunge into the sea of knowledge and hope that we don't drown. Benson let out a self-deprecating laugh as he returned to the dining room with Melissa. Klein went to the second floor and locked the door to his room. He sealed the room with a wall of spirituality, then he took 4 steps counterclockwise as he recited the incantations, returning to the world above the gray fog. His figure suddenly appeared at the seat of honor in the magnificent palace fit for a giant. A pulsing crimson star reflected in his eyes. Klein lifted his right hand and extended his spirituality, establishing a connection with the star representing justice. With a boom, he saw a blurred, distorted image. He saw Miss Justice in a long beige regal dress sitting on a chair in a dark corner. Her head was bowed, her hands clasped. At the same time, her still nascent and nervous voice stacked in an illusory manner, reverberating around the space, the fool that doesn't belong to this era, you are the mysterious ruler above the gray fog, you are the king of yellow and black who wields good luck. I pray for your attention. I pray for you to listen. I'm at a ball held by Duke Negan and encountered someone who's suspected to be Kalangos. He is disguising himself as Baron Grammar, and his motives are unclear. I noticed today that some of the details regarding Baron Grammar were a little different than usual. This made me recall the appearance-altering beyonder power that Kalangos' mystical item has. Klein listened seriously and carefully interpreted what was happening. Finally, he understood what Miss Justice was describing. Kalangos has actually used the special powers of creeping hunger to infiltrate Duke Negan's ball. But Kalangos probably didn't expect that one of the ladies at the ball is a spectator who has committed the mannerisms of Baron Grammar to memory. Hence, he doesn't realize that he's been exposed. What does Kalangos want? And what should I do? I've tried conducting the sacrificial ritual without spirituality-infused materials over the past 2 days and realized that I can create something like the Door of Summoning, but I'm unable to open it. I was going to find some time to purchase some materials with spirituality in the underground market to prepare for my second experiment. Miss Justice definitely wouldn't have spirituality-infused materials when she's attending a ball. Klein thought for more than 10 seconds before beginning his response to Justice's prayer. In a small prayer room in Duke Negan's mansion, Audrey repeated her prayers a few times before finally stopping. She tidied her clothes and walked quickly to the door. She knew that she couldn't be gone for too long because her parents would worry about her and thus misjudge the situation. It would cause them to react in the wrong way. Standing behind the door, Audrey took a deep breath, extended her right hand, which was covered in a white veiled glove, and released the lock with a wary heart. After leaving the small prayer room, she followed the path back to the dining hall. She saw the figures holding wine glasses and plates get closer when her vision suddenly turned blurry. She realized that an illusory fog was spreading into the surroundings. In the middle of the thick, wide fog was an ancient chair, and atop the chair was a mysterious presence that seemed to overlook everything. "Mr. Fool!" Audrey almost shouted in pleasant surprise. She then heard a deep, familiar voice, "I'm aware." The voice reverberated around the space as the fog vanished. Audrey's vision was still filled with images of the long tables of food and wine, as well as the bustling sights of interacting guests. The worry and unease in her heart vanished as she subconsciously straightened her back and entered the dining hall with light steps. She walked toward the recreation room in the dining hall. In the magnificent palace in the world of fog. Klein started to think about how to convey the message to the hanged man after finishing his reply to Miss Justice. I cannot just repeat the description to him since it undermines my authority. After all, what mysterious existence would personally take on the role of a messenger? He deliberated for nearly a minute before an idea came to him. He conjured the scene of Miss Justice praying and transformed it into something akin to a movie scene with the faces mosaicked and censored. He then extended his hand and tapped, launching the scene into the crimson star representing the hanged man. Backlund, Sherwood Backlund. At the Holy Wind Cathedral. The hanged man, Alger Wilson, was going through the investigation reports in a simple room, trying to find traces of Rear Admiral Hurricane Kalangos. Near his right hand was a stack of paper filled with many contorted symbols. Just as Alger was leaning back in his chair and rubbing his eyes, he saw his field of vision turn blurry. His line of sight was filled with thick, gray fog. There was an ancient chair which seemed to exist eternally, deep within the endless fog. Atop the chair was a faint human figure. Mr. Fool. Just as this thought came to Alger, he saw that another hazy figure in a regal dress within the grayish-white fog. She was in a praying position, repeating, I'm at a ball held by Duke Negan and encountered someone who's suspected to be Kalangos. He is disguising himself as Baron Grammar, and his motives are unclear. I noticed today that some of the details regarding Baron Grammar were a little different than usual. This made me recall the appearance-altering beyonder power that Kalangos' mystical item has. Alger was shocked at first, then let out a look of pleasant surprise. He pressed his palm against his chest and lowered his head. Praise you, Mr. Fool. Everything he saw or heard vanished before he finished his sentence as if nothing had happened. Staring at the desk strewn with Emperor Rosel's diary pages and his investigation reports, Alger's pupils constricted as he realized how powerful the fool was once again. This was the Holy Wind Cathedral, once the headquarters of the Church of the Lord of Storms. Even though that was history from more than 1,000 years ago, many believers still viewed this place as sacred. But Mr. Fool could still descend upon this space without warning and give a reply. After nearly 20 seconds of silence, Alger gathered his stuff and exited the room. He was going to look for one of the cardinals of the Church of the Lord of Storms, the Archbishop of the Backlund Diocese, Spellsinger of God, Ace Snake. For Alger Wilson, being able to kill Rear Admiral Hurricane Kalangos personally was the best course of action, but if he was unable to do that, guaranteeing that he was really dead was also acceptable in his book. After forwarding Miss Justice's description to the hanged man, Klein left the mysterious world above the gray fog and returned to his bedroom. While he was in no hurry to dispel the wall of spirituality, he sat before his desk and took out a piece of paper. He picked up a pen and began his letter. According to an urgent indication from a source, Kalangos has used the abilities of a shepherd to take on the appearance of Baron Grammar and has infiltrated Duke Negan's ball. His motives are unclear as of this moment. Klein wasn't worried that Mr. Azik would be suspicious of him or doubt why someone in Tingen would be so quick to know something that just happened in Backlund, for the telegraph existed in this world. I don't know if you would be interested in this, but I thought that I should let you know. Klein quickly ended the letter and folded the piece of paper. He then found the ancient copper whistle, brought it to his mouth, and gave it a hard blow. The gigantic, terrifying, and illusory skeleton messenger appeared once again, still standing at its original spot, not minding that its head was going through the ceiling. Klein fought back the urge to use the abilities of the clown to turn the letter into a flying dagger. He tossed the letter towards the messenger without a fuss. He then blew on the copper whistle once again to end the summoning. Klein collected himself and went through the events in his head once again. This was all he could do for the time being. Although Klein could also make use of the summoning ritual and bring the flaring sun charm directly to Backlund, it was too dangerous for him to do so. First, Kalangos was a sequence 6 wind-blessed and had with him the creeping hunger. Second, it was too troublesome. He had to first bring the flaring sun charm to the world above the gray fog. Third, his image would be affected. Thus, he wisely gave up on this idea. To be honest, the problem is not too serious. Duke Negan is the most influential noble outside of the royal family, a key member behind the Conservative Party. There will be many high-ranking nobles attending the ball today. I have no doubt that there are Beyonders guarding the area. If not for this consideration, there would have been no need for him to infiltrate the place under a disguise. Since Miss Justice noticed him early, the nobles should be prepared. This incident shouldn't blow out of control. I wonder how fast Mr. Azik's messenger is? If it travels through the spirit world, Mr. Azik could still likely make it in time for the main course, but if it's as slow as Madame Daly's messenger, then he might only read about the incident in tomorrow's paper. Klein nodded indiscernibly and tossed this incident to the back of his head. After all, there was nothing more that he could do. Chapter 190, The Assortment of Abilities in Duke Negan's Mansion, in the Dancing Hall. Disguised as Baron Grammar, Kalangos held a glass of blood-red Ormer grape wine and casually stood behind the railing on the winding corridor on the second floor. He overlooked the people on the dance floor and enjoyed the view of the glamorously dressed ladies. However, there was no lust in his eyes, they were as calm as a frozen lake. From the corner of his eyes, he stole glances at the hanging chandelier and the nearby Duke Negan, who was looking at the beautiful figures passing by. The Duke was wearing a well-ironed navy uniform with red ribbons attached to the medals on his shoulders. He preferred to wear his military uniform on formal occasions, in remembrance of his decades of illustrious service while in the military. However, he had put on much weight since then. His once sharp gray eyes had been left turbid and filled with desire. However, he took good care of himself, as the wrinkles at the corners of his eyes, lips, and forehead were faint, and his black hair was still thick and luxuriant. That was Palace Negan, the current Duke Negan, the main supporter of the Conservative Party, the brother of Prime Minister Aguisid, one of the richest and most powerful men in the Lone Kingdom. At the same time, he was also the reason why Kalangos had sneaked into Backland. The thought of assassinating such an important figure makes me shiver in excitement. Kalangos retracted his gaze and closed his eyes. He was willing to accept the commission because he had been offered a sufficiently attractive price, and it was also because Kalangos loved adventure and enjoyed taking on difficult challenges. If this assassination is successful, my fame will spread across the northern and southern continents, placing me above the four kings. And I'll receive a card which contains the mystery of God that the Emperor Roselle created. Kalangos suppressed his excitement and lowered his head to examine his left hand. Creeping hunger had become transparent. It was impossible to tell that Baron Grammar was wearing a glove via the naked eye or through contact. This is such a magical item. If it wasn't for this, a Sequence 6 like me wouldn't have achieved the rank of Pirate Admiral. Thoughts flashed through his mind as bouts of regret surged within Kalangos. In his years as a pirate, he had seen and interacted with many Beyonders. Among them were members of the Aurora Order who enjoyed adventuring at the ends of the Sonia Sea. So, he knew that creeping hunger was still rather different from a real shepherd. Firstly, the speed of switching states was too slow. It required at least a second, but a real shepherd could switch instantly. Secondly, the controlled soul could only use 1 to 3 abilities before the person died. As for what abilities could be used and how powerful they were, that all depended on luck. On the other hand, a real shepherd could decide on the 3 abilities. They didn't have to gamble like they were at a casino. Lastly, creeping hunger could only have 5 souls at the same time, while a real shepherd could have 7. Of course, both had the same restriction, which was that they could only control 1 soul at a time, and they could only use the soul's corresponding Beyonder powers and their own Beyonder powers. If they wanted to replace one of the souls with a new soul, the procedure would be irreversible. Kalangos went through 7 or 8 years of adjustment and finally settled with 5 souls. Their abilities complemented one another and made their owner very terrifying. Because of the constant adjustments and experimentation that he did over the years, there were rumors among the pirates that claimed that Rear Admiral Hurricane was omnipotent. During the ardent dance music, Kalangos rehearsed the subsequent actions he would take in his mind. He sighed with regret in his heart. It's a pity that I didn't find the traveler over the past few days. Otherwise, I wouldn't have to worry about anything tonight. If he had captured the woman that was most likely a traveler, Kalangos wouldn't have hesitated to feed one of the 5 souls that he was grazing to the creeping hunger. To him, a traveler's ability would be invaluable. Kalangos stole a glance at the huge crystal chandelier hanging from the rooftop and decided to wait no longer. The soul that he controlled currently had only one ability, which was to change his appearance. But it didn't possess any power to fight against other Beyonders. However, the transformation ability was still very useful, and Kalangos hadn't been willing to replace it with something else all this time. The good thing was that no matter which soul he controlled, Kalangos could use his wind-blessed Beyonder powers at the same time. Finally, he acted as though his gaze was locking onto the curvy figure of a noble's wife before he swept it towards Duke Negan and all the gentlemen around him. Duke Negan is a staunch follower of the Lord of Storms, and he is a key figure in the influence the Church of the Lord of Storms has on politics. There must be a Beyonder from the Church of the Lord of Storms beside him who's protecting him. Although the Negan family isn't an ancient 1,000-year-old family, he's one of the wealthiest and powerful men in the kingdom. He's definitely searched for sequence potion formulas in secret or hired Beyonders. Kalangos's thoughts surged. He mentally eliminated gentlemen who were nobles and officers before locking his eyes on the man who was constantly beside Duke Negan. The man was brown-haired, blue-eyed, and wearing a black tuxedo. He was almost expressionless while he remained vigilant of his surroundings constantly. Kalangos nodded indiscernibly and pressed his right hand forward slightly. Whoosh! A sudden gust of wind swept in the area above the dance floor, extinguishing the chandelier's candles. At the moment between light and darkness, while everyone's attention was drawn away, a few wind blades slashed at the same spot on a metal chain supporting the crystal chandelier guised among the gusts of wind. Creak! With a harsh, shattering noise, the huge crystal chandelier plummeted straight to the dance floor. It made a loud crash, and people screamed in surprise. Shards of debris flew, cutting guests and leaving them screaming in pain and fear. The darkened hall was suddenly full of opportunities. Kalangos's glove squirmed and changed, condensing into a golden surface. His expression was imposing and his eyes saw through the darkness as he fixed his gaze onto the man next to Duke Negan. Suddenly, Kalangos's eyes shone like lightning. The Beyonder who was in charge of protecting Duke Negan suddenly let out a tragic scream and fell on the ground holding his head. He rolled around and struggled. With a swoosh, Kalangos's figure dashed through the darkness and charged at Duke Negan. However, in the deep recesses of his eyes, it reflected his target who didn't show any signs of panic. It was of utmost confidence. Duke Negan's plump figure stood erect on the spot and observed the incoming assassin as if he were looking down on him. He lifted his right hand and pushed forward. He murmured in ancient Hermes, "Imprison." In silence, Kalangos suddenly stopped. He was suddenly surrounded by a transparent wall, something that wrapped around him like a sticky liquid. It made him seem like an insect in amber, or a prisoner in prison. The leader of the Conservative Party nobles, the hereditary Duke Palace Negan, was a Beyonder himself, a very strong Beyonder. Duke Negan spoke in a low voice again and waved his right hand. "Flog. Paw. Paw." Kalangos seemed to be whipped by a shapeless whip. His clothing tore from the whipping as his skin was lacerated, revealing white bone. Then, Duke Negan leaned forward and held his right first. He declared in an imposing manner, "Death. Paw." His arm waved as his entire body slammed into Kalangos's head with numerous afterimages. His fist had struck his target's head in an unavoidable manner. Kacha. Kalangos's head shattered, but the surroundings shattered as well. Duke Negan remained standing at his original spot. It was just a dream. It was unknown when the pirate admiral had already switched his ability and entered the nightmare state. Unlike an ordinary nightmare, he could still move his body after he dragged people into a dream. Kalangos stealthily appeared behind Duke Negan, and his cold gaze locked onto the Duke. Wrapped with high-speed spiraling winds, his right fist stabbed into the target's vest like a sharp blade. Whoosh! Amidst the howling of the wind, Kalangos's right fist punched straight through Duke Negan's body and through his heart. But Duke Negan's figure rapidly turned transparent, just like a soul that was summoned. After the nearly formless figure dissipated, Duke Negan appeared before the French door on the other side of the winding corridor. He wore a scrutinizing smile. Another Beyonder. They prepared ahead of time? To lay an ambush for me? How is that possible? Although Kalangos was unwilling to accept this fact, he dealt with it calmly. The glove on his left hand squirmed and took on the form of dark golden scales. His irises grew pale and became vertical. Then, a shapeless wave swept from every direction. Ladies and gentlemen were thrown into a state of uncontrollable fear at the same time. They left their hiding places and ran around aimlessly. The scene became chaotic. The Beyonders didn't dare to act recklessly as they were worried they might hurt their relatives and friends. Seizing the opportunity, Kalangos ran quickly as hurricanes whirled around him. He smashed through one of the resting room doors before smashing through an oriel window. Amidst the shattering sound, he leaped outside and flew a distance away from Duke Negan's mansion with the aid of the wind. The moment he landed, Kalangos immediately ran towards a forest ahead of him. It was a municipal garden, an escape route he had scouted out a while ago. Once he shook off his pursuers, he could change his appearance and blend into the massive population of Backlund of more than 5 million people. That was also the reason why he dared to accept such a difficult mission. After a while, there was gale blowing towards Duke Negan's mansion. The Cardinal of the Church of the Lord of Storms, the Archbishop of Backlund, Spellsinger of God, Ace Snake brought a few mandated punishers and flew towards the mansion. He couldn't inform the other Beyonders in time. Alger was one of the members that arrived with Archbishop Ace. However, He was in a bad mood because he saw the broken windows and the other Beyonders running out of the mansion. It meant that Rear Admiral Hurricane Kalangos had escaped. You're tuning into the Biyao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.